Imagine standing in front of a mirror. You see your face, your body, maybe your clothes or hair. You say, "That's me." But is it really? What exactly are you pointing to when you say, "me"? Is it your body? Your thoughts? Your memories? This is where the paradox of the disappearance of the self begins. It's a strange, slippery idea that starts out feeling simple and ends with your whole sense of identity fading into something you can't quite touch anymore. Let's start with something basic. You might think the self is your body, but the body changes all the time. Cells die and regenerate, your appearance changes with age, your brain chemistry shifts. Are you the same you that you were when you were 5 years old? In some ways, yes, you remember being that child. But physically, emotionally, mentally, you've changed. So is the you of today really the same as that earlier version? Okay, maybe it's not the body. Maybe the self is your mind. Your thoughts, your feelings, your memories. But even those aren't stable. You think different things depending on the day, your emotions fluctuate wildly, and your memories? Well, memories can be faulty, distorted, even forgotten. Try to remember a childhood vacation. Do you see the exact moment, or just a mental snapshot that's been edited over time? What if that memory isn't even accurate? So maybe the self is a kind of narrative, a story you tell yourself about who you are. I'm the kind of person who, we all do this. But stories can change. Think of a time you surprised yourself. Maybe you did something brave you never thought you could. Or maybe you reacted to something in a way that felt totally unlike you. In that moment, the story changed. And if your sense of self depends on the story, then it changes, too. Here's where it gets even weirder. As you look deeper into your own mind, meditate, reflect, observe your thoughts, you start to notice something strange. There's a voice in your head, sure. But who's listening to it? Who is the observer behind the thoughts? Is there really a thinker, or just thoughts arising and passing like clouds? Some philosophers and spiritual traditions suggest that the more closely you examine the self, the more it disappears. It's like chasing a shadow. You get closer and closer, only to find there's nothing solid there. The self becomes like an onion. Peel back layer after layer, your name, your personality, your beliefs, and eventually there's nothing in the center. Just awareness. Just presence. Here's an example. Imagine you're playing a video game. You control a character. You make decisions, you have goals. In the game, you are that character. But step back and you realize you're not the character. You're the player, holding the controller. Now take one more step back. What if the player, too, is part of a bigger system? What if you are just another avatar running a script? This can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. We like to think of ourselves as stable, solid beings. But maybe the self is more like a moving pattern, like a whirlpool in a river. The water flows, always changing, yet the whirlpool appears to have a shape. It looks like something. But try to touch it, and there's nothing there. And yet, paradoxically, this vanishing of the self doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you might not exist in the way you thought. Not as a fixed identity, but as a process. A dance between brain, body, memory, environment, and experience. You are not the dancer, you are the dance. Think of a candle's flame. Is the flame a thing? Or is it a process of burning? Blow out the candle and the flame vanishes, not because it went somewhere, but because the conditions that made it were no longer present. Maybe the self is like that, a flame made of experience, thought, sensation, and when you search for it directly, it flickers and fades. This is why so many deep thinkers have warned that the question, "Who am I?" has no final answer. Every time you try to pin it down, it slips through your fingers. And yet, that very slipping is the truth. The self is not a noun. It's a verb. Not something you have, but something you do. Every moment, every breath, is part of that doing. So where does that leave us? With a strange realization. The more you search for the core of yourself, the less solid it becomes. The more aware you become, the less certain you are of who you really are. And that's the paradox. In becoming more conscious of the self begins to dissolve. Like a dream that vanishes when you try to hold on to it. like a word repeated so many times it loses its meaning. So, 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 what is that really? And yet, life goes on. You still laugh, cry, love, eat, sleep. You function just fine. Maybe even better. Because when you stop clinging to a fixed idea of me, you become more free. Free to change. Free to grow. Free to be whatever the moment requires. The self disappears, but something deeper remains. Something quiet. Something vast. Not the I you thought you were, but maybe something even more true. Let's say someone asks you, how do you know what you know? Sounds simple, right? But if you really think about it, this question leads to something surprisingly deep and kind of terrifying. Welcome to the Munchausen trilemma. Imagine you're in court. The judge asks you to prove your innocence. You provide evidence. But then they ask, how do we know this evidence is reliable? So you bring more evidence to support the first one. Then they say, okay, how do we know this second piece is trustworthy? And on it goes. This is the heart of the problem. It's like chasing your own tail forever. Every time you try to prove something, you have to prove the thing you used to prove it, and then prove that too. This is called an infinite regress. One of the 3 dead ends the Munchausen trilemma shows us. The idea is that when you try to justify any piece of knowledge, you hit one of 3 walls. You either go in a loop, keep explaining forever, or accept something without proof. Let's break it down. The first option is circular reasoning. This is when you use what you're trying to prove as part of the proof itself. It's like saying, I'm always right because I said so, and since I'm always right, you have to believe me. That's not a real argument. It just spins in a circle. The second is infinite regress. Like the courtroom example, it's when every answer needs another answer behind it, and there's no end. You're always needing another reason, another proof, another explanation, forever. It's like asking, what's this built on? And the answer is, another platform. And then, what's that built on? Another one. And it never ends. No final foundation. The third option is dogmatic assumption. This is when you just accept something as true without proving it. Like saying, this is just the way it is. Maybe that works for practical purposes, but it doesn't actually answer the question. It's like stopping the conversation and saying, let's agree this is true and move on. But deep down, it's still an assumption. So why is it called the Munchausen trilemma? It's named after Baron Munchausen, a fictional character who claimed he once pulled himself out of a swamp by his own hair. That's impossible, of course. Just like trying to justify knowledge purely by itself, it can't lift itself up without outside support. Knowledge can't pull itself out of uncertainty. Now, this might sound frustrating. If we can't fully prove anything, what's the point? Are we just lost in doubt forever? Not exactly. The trilemma doesn't say we know nothing. It just says we can't reach 100% certainty in a way that escapes those 3 traps. Most of what we know is built on assumptions, trust, and patterns that seem to work. Science, for example, relies on the idea that the universe behaves in consistent ways. But why should it always do that? We can't prove it absolutely, we just observe that it usually does. Think of it like building a house. You might think the foundation is solid, but the trilemma says, are you sure? What's under the foundation? And under that? You can go deeper and deeper, but at some point, you either loop, go forever, or stop and say, that's enough. Another way to picture this, imagine stacking books to reach a high shelf. You put one on top of another, and another, and another. But you never actually reach the shelf. You just keep stacking. That's infinite regress. Or you use one book to support another, and then loop back to the first one. That's circular reasoning. Or maybe you just say, this book is tall enough, and stop. That's the dogmatic assumption. The trilemma doesn't just apply to philosophy. You see it in arguments all the time. Why do you believe in that? Because this book says so. Why trust the book? Because the author is credible. Why is the author credible? And so on. You'll hit one of the 3 traps every time. Even in daily life, we make decisions based on things we assume. You trust that the brakes on your car will work. You believe the food you buy isn't poisoned. You think your memories are mostly accurate. But all of those beliefs rest on layers of trust and past experience, not ultimate proof. So what do we do with this? Some people embrace foundationalism. They pick one or a few base beliefs they accept without proof and build everything else on top. Others go for coherentism. They say beliefs are justified if they fit together well, like a puzzle. Then there's skepticism, doubting everything unless it's completely provable, which often leads to believing very little. But here's the twist: most people live just fine without worrying about this. We act, we learn, we change our minds, and we carry on. But the Munchausen trilemma is a powerful reminder. It whispers, just because it makes sense doesn't mean it's absolutely true. It challenges us to be humble about our knowledge, to ask better questions, to know that somewhere, deep down, all our understanding is sitting on something we chose to accept, without final proof. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Maybe knowing we can't be totally certain helps us stay curious, open, and honest. After all, the moment we stop questioning is the moment we stop learning. Imagine two people, both driving home late at night. Both had a few drinks, both are slightly over the limit, and both decide to take the risk and drive anyway. They're equally reckless. But here's what happens. The first driver gets home safely. The second driver accidentally hits a pedestrian who suddenly crossed the street, and the pedestrian dies. Now here's the question: should we judge these two drivers differently? Legally, we probably do. The first driver goes home without consequence, maybe never even feels guilty. The second is charged with manslaughter, faces prison, and is morally condemned. But morally, deep down, should we treat them differently? They took the same action with the same level of risk. The only difference was luck. One got lucky, the other didn't. This is the heart of the moral luck paradox. It challenges a basic idea in ethics, that we should only be judged for what we can control. You can't blame someone for being born poor, for the weather ruining their plans, or for being hit by a falling tree. But what if the outcome of your actions, something out of your control, completely changes how people see you and how you see yourself? Let's take another example. Picture a soldier in war. He fires his weapon during a battle. One bullet hits an enemy. Another soldier, right next to him, does the same thing, but his bullet hits a civilian by mistake. Same decision, same intention, same situation. But one is called a hero, and the other is investigated for a war crime. The only difference was what happened after. That's moral luck. Or think of a student cheating on a test. Two students, same answers, same method of cheating. One gets caught, one doesn't. The one who's caught gets expelled and carries the label of dishonest. The other goes on, gets a degree, and maybe ends up praised as successful. Are they really different morally? Or did luck decide who gets judged? The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously explored this idea. He argued that much of what we do is affected by things beyond our control. Where we're born, how we were raised, what opportunities we had, the people around us, even the timing of events. And yet, society still holds us responsible, as if we had full control. Let's zoom in on the types of moral luck Nagel described. First, there's resultant luck. That's what happened with the drunk drivers. Two identical decisions, but different outcomes. We judge based on consequences, even when those consequences were random. Then there's circumstantial luck. Imagine you grew up in a peaceful country, with loving parents and a good education. Maybe you never had to face real moral tests. No extreme poverty, no war, no corruption. Someone else grows up in a violent, unstable country, surrounded by crime. They're forced into impossible situations. We judge their choices harshly, but what if our own choices would have been different in their place? Third is constitutive luck, the kind of person you are. Your personality, your emotions, your tendencies. Are you calm or aggressive? Patient or impulsive? These traits shape how you act, but many come from your genetics or upbringing. Can we really say someone is bad if their character was shaped by things they never chose? And finally, there's causal luck. This one runs deep. It's the idea that every action you take is caused by prior events, your brain chemistry, your life experiences, things that go back even before you were born. If you follow that chain long enough, It looks like no one really chooses anything freely. And if that's true, how can we blame anyone? This paradox shakes the ground under moral responsibility. It makes you ask, how much credit or blame can anyone truly deserve? Let's take one more everyday example. Two people apply for the same job. One gets it because the employer happened to be in a good mood that day. That job changes their life. The other doesn't get hired, struggles financially, and ends up taking desperate actions. Maybe even something illegal. The first is called a success. The second is judged a failure. But the difference started with a coin toss moment, something no one controlled. So what do we do with this? Some philosophers say we should ignore the outcomes and judge only intentions. If someone meant well, we forgive them, even if things go badly. Others argue that outcomes matter. If your actions lead to harm, even if unintentionally, you carry some responsibility. But it's not just about blame. It's also about praise. Think of a tech founder who builds a billion-dollar company. They're hailed as a genius, a visionary. But maybe their success depended on being born in the right country, going to the right school, meeting the right investor at the right time. Another person with the same ideas and work ethic might never get noticed. So do we celebrate success as if it were fully earned? Or was it part luck? This doesn't mean we throw out all judgment. We still need laws, consequences, and moral standards. But the paradox asks us to slow down, to be more compassionate, to realize that behind every action, good or bad, there's a hidden world of chance, timing, and background. It also teaches humility. If you've never had to make a desperate choice, maybe it's because life hasn't put you in that position. If you've succeeded, maybe part of it was luck. That doesn't take away your effort, but it puts things in perspective. At the end of the day, the moral luck paradox doesn't give us easy answers. It just holds up a mirror and asks, are you judging fairly? Are you sure you understand the whole story? It's a reminder that life isn't always about what people do, but also about what happens to them and around them without their control. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. Imagine this: you have a challenge. You need to name numbers using only a limited number of words. For example, you could easily name 25 in 2 words or 102 in 4 words. But what if the challenge was trickier, like naming the smallest positive integer not nameable in under 11 words? At first glance, it seems straightforward. But if you think about it carefully, something strange happens. Let's walk through it slowly to see why. We start by thinking about numbers and how we name them. Numbers like 1, 7, or 1001 are simple. Even big numbers, like 10,000,000,007, can still be named pretty easily. But now, let's consider the phrase again: the smallest positive integer not nameable in under 11 words. This is known as the Berry paradox, named after the librarian and philosopher G.G. Berry. First, let's count the words in the phrase itself: the smallest positive integer not nameable in under 11 words. Exactly 10 words. So, this statement seems like a clear, meaningful description, right? It feels specific and logical. It describes exactly one number, the smallest number you can't describe using fewer than 11 words. But here's the strange part. By describing this number clearly, we have just named it using only 10 words. Let that sink in. We used exactly 10 words to name the number that, by definition, cannot be named in fewer than 11 words. But now, the description itself contradicts its meaning. If we've named it in just 10 words, then it is nameable in under 11 words, making the description false. But if it's false, it means we actually haven't named the correct number, which would mean the description is true again. And round we go, forever stuck in a logical loop. This paradox belongs to a special kind of puzzle known as self-reference paradoxes. Self-reference is when something talks about itself or refers to its own characteristics. Here, the Berry paradox statement refers directly to its own length and meaning, creating a kind of logical short circuit. To understand better, let's take a simpler example. Imagine a book titled, "This book has exactly 20 words in its title." If you count and find that the title does indeed have 20 words, everything is fine. But if you count and discover there are only 6 words, then the title lied, and it's no longer accurate. The berry paradox is like that, but even more tangled because it's about numbers and naming rules. Now, why is this paradox important or interesting? At first, it might seem just like a clever puzzle, but it's actually quite deep. It challenges how we understand language, logic, and even mathematics. Normally, we think of numbers as stable, clear things we can name and describe easily. But the berry paradox suggests that language has limits, that our system of naming and defining things is not always straightforward. This paradox also highlights a fundamental problem in logic. Definitions can't always handle self-reference smoothly. This issue isn't just a playful curiosity, it touches on the foundations of mathematics and language itself. In fact, logicians and mathematicians have studied these kinds of paradoxes extensively because they reveal subtle gaps in how we communicate and reason about reality. Another interesting aspect is how the paradox forces us to consider the difference between naming and describing. You might assume they're the same thing, but they're slightly different. Naming something usually means giving it a clear, concise label. Describing something might involve explaining it at length. But even then, when descriptions become short enough, they effectively become names, like the tallest building in the world. Everyone knows it refers specifically to a particular building, even without saying its official name. But what if descriptions are the only way to name certain things? Like the number in the berry paradox, some things only seem describable through indirect references. But then the paradox kicks in again, making us question the very idea of clear and direct naming. Let's try a different angle to clarify the paradox even further. Suppose we decide to list all numbers we can describe in fewer than 11 words. We might start easily: 1, 2, 100, 1000, the smallest prime number greater than a million. As we continue, we assume that some numbers become too complicated to describe briefly. Eventually, there's a smallest number we just can't describe using fewer than 11 words. At least, that's what the paradox tells us. But the moment we call it the smallest positive integer not nameable in under 11 words, we've done exactly what we claimed impossible, we've described it concisely. This means our original idea of such a number existing is somehow flawed. But if no such number exists, then we run into an even bigger problem. Clearly, there are infinitely many numbers and a limited number of short descriptions. At some point, we must hit a number we can't succinctly describe, right? Yet trying to pinpoint that number with a description instantly contradicts itself. This fascinating confusion reveals something deep. Language is powerful, but it also has limits. Not everything can be clearly expressed without causing logical problems. Philosophers and mathematicians have struggled with these ideas for decades. These paradoxes aren't just playful, they help scientists and thinkers realize that there are boundaries to what can be logically expressed or fully understood using normal language. The berry paradox also closely relates to other famous puzzles, like the liar paradox, where someone says, "This sentence is false. If it's true, then it's false, but if it's false, it's true." Similarly, the berry paradox creates a loop by trying to precisely define something that defies precise definition. Ultimately, the berry paradox doesn't just tease your mind, it teaches humility about our understanding. It reminds us that even logic and mathematics, which seem perfectly clear and precise, hide strange, tangled problems. It suggests that there will always be things that escape easy description, pushing us to rethink how we approach language, logic, and the foundations of knowledge itself. In short, the berry paradox isn't just an odd curiosity. It reveals hidden limits and contradictions in logic and language, showing us that the world of thought is far more complex, interesting, and mysterious than it might first appear. Imagine this: you're holding a green apple in your hand. You've seen thousands of green apples over your life, and based on your experience, you believe all apples are green. You make a simple inductive assumption: all apples are green. Now, let's shake things up a little. What if someone introduced a new word? Let's call it grue. Grue is a color that describes objects that are green before a specific time, say 2025, and blue after that. So, in this world, the apple you're holding isn't just green, it's also grue. This new category, grew challenges everything we know about induction, which is the idea that we can generalize from past experiences to predict future events. This is known as Goodman's paradox, named after philosopher Nelson Goodman, who introduced this puzzle in the 1950s. Now, let's think about the implications. You've been observing green apples for years, and based on this observation, you predict that all future apples will be green. So far, so good. But here's where Goodman's paradox hits hard. If you accept the concept of grew, then the apples you've seen are not just green, they're also grew. And based on your inductive reasoning, you would expect all future apples to be grew as well. However, we all know that apples will continue to be green, not blue, as time goes on. But your logic could just as easily suggest that apples will turn blue after 2025 because of the definition of grew. This is the heart of Goodman's paradox. It asks, why do we trust green as a good inductive category, but not grew? What makes green the right color for future apples and not grew? To dive deeper, let's explore the nature of induction. Induction is the process of making generalizations based on past experiences. For example, you might have seen 1,000 green apples, so you predict that the next apple will also be green. This reasoning is the foundation of most scientific predictions. The problem, however, is that induction assumes that what has happened in the past will continue to happen in the future. But when we add new words, like grew, suddenly there's a conflict. Here's where things get interesting. Goodman's paradox doesn't just challenge the specific idea of whether future apples will be green or blue. It's more profound. It challenges how we justify what categories we use in our inductive reasoning in the first place. Why is green the correct category and not grew? Both categories could be just as valid, but one feels more natural to us than the other. Think about the word grew in a different context. Suppose you're predicting the color of the sky tomorrow. Based on years of experience, you predict that the sky will be blue, just like it always has been. But now, using the concept of grew, you could say that the sky is grew, meaning that it's blue today and will turn green after a certain time. But no one would expect the sky to turn green, right? So why do we feel more comfortable predicting blue skies than predicting grew skies? The paradox also points out how much of our reasoning is tied to language and the categories we create. The word grew isn't something we would naturally use to describe the color of things. The word green, on the other hand, has a long history of use and is tied to our everyday experiences. Goodman's paradox shows that our language affects how we reason about the world. We use words that fit our expectations, and those expectations shape our predictions about the future. Goodman's paradox forces us to ask some tough questions. What does it mean to know something about the world? How do we decide which words to use when describing the world? Are our inductive practices truly justified, or do they rely on convenient assumptions we've never questioned? Here's another way to think about it. Suppose you're a scientist studying the behavior of birds. Over the years, you've observed that every bird you've encountered has flown south for the winter. Based on this, you might predict that all future birds will also fly south. But what if, one day, someone introduces a new word, bleen? Bleen describes birds that are red before a certain date and green afterward. Now, based on your observations, you might predict that all future birds will be bleen. They'll be red today and turn green after the specified date. Does this prediction make sense? It certainly follows the logic of induction, but it doesn't match what we actually expect to happen. We expect birds to keep flying south, not to follow some arbitrary change in color or behavior. This is the problem Goodman's paradox reveals. It suggests that our inductive reasoning might not be as solid as we think, because it's based on categories and definitions that we've just decided are natural, even though there could be other valid categories that would lead to very different predictions. Goodman's paradox isn't just about colors and birds, though. It's a reflection of how we use language to shape our understanding of the world. When we create new words and categories, we change the way we think about and predict the future. The problem is, there's no clear reason why one category, like green, should be better than another, like grew, for making predictions. So, how do we resolve this paradox? Some philosophers argue that we can justify inductive reasoning by appealing to the way our concepts fit together coherently. In other words, we accept that some categories make more sense than others because they align better with our experiences and our general understanding of the world. Others argue that this isn't enough, that we need a deeper justification for why certain categories are more valid for inductive reasoning. But the paradox still stands. If you accept the concept of grew, then why is green the better choice for predicting the future? And if both are valid categories, how do we choose which one to trust? Goodman's paradox is a powerful challenge to our understanding of induction and language. It makes us question not just how we predict the future, but why we predict it in the way we do. And it reminds us that our reasoning might not be as objective as we think. It could be shaped by the very words we use. Imagine you're in a conversation and your friend says, "Wow, that was really impressive," but they roll their eyes and smirk. If you're paying attention, you'll know they don't actually mean it. They're being ironic. The literal meaning of their words doesn't match their tone or body language, and you understand that the true meaning is the opposite of what was said. This is irony, the expression of something contrary to what is literally stated, often for humorous or emphatic effect. But what happens if the irony doesn't land? What if you take the statement literally and don't pick up on the sarcastic tone or the eye roll? Suddenly, the communication breaks down. The message gets misunderstood. You might think your friend is genuinely impressed, when in fact, they're making fun of you. This is where the irony-intention paradox comes in. The paradox occurs when the intention behind a statement, being ironic, isn't communicated effectively, or when something meant ironically is taken literally. The communicative intent collapses. The irony intended by the speaker is lost, and the listener interprets the message in the most straightforward way. What was meant to be sarcastic ends up being sincere, and vice versa. Let's dive deeper into this. Suppose you're at a party, and someone says, "Oh great, another boring speech," while everyone around them is clearly enjoying the conversation. In this case, the speaker is intending to be ironic. They don't actually think the speech is boring. But if the listener doesn't catch the tone, they might think the speaker is genuinely disappointed, leading to confusion. Now, flip this around. What if you're the one saying something ironic, but the person you're speaking to takes you completely literally? For example, you might say, "Oh, I just love being stuck in traffic for hours," intending to express frustration, but the person next to you thinks you're truly enjoying the situation and responds with, "Oh, really? That's great." They've completely missed your irony. The message you intended didn't come across, and what you said was understood literally, rather than as a sarcastic remark. This is the essence of the irony-intention paradox. It's a breakdown in communication caused by a mismatch between what you intend to communicate and how it's understood by the listener. The irony relies on a shared understanding, something outside of the literal meaning of the words. If that shared understanding is missing, the intended irony collapses. This paradox is more than just a miscommunication. It exposes something interesting about language and how we convey meaning. When we speak, we don't just rely on the literal meanings of words. We use tone, body language, context, and cultural norms to communicate more complex ideas. These nonverbal cues help to signal irony, sarcasm, and other forms of indirect communication. But when these cues are missing or misinterpreted, the message becomes distorted, leading to confusion. Think of it like trying to follow a map with missing landmarks. The directions may be clear, but if some of the key reference points aren't there, you could easily get lost. Let's take another example to explore this paradox further. Imagine you're a teacher and you're talking to a student who's just turned in a sloppy assignment. You say, "Well, this is just fantastic work," in a sarcastic tone. If the student doesn't pick up on your sarcasm, they might feel proud of their work, thinking you genuinely think it's fantastic. They're not interpreting your words in the way you intended. Instead, they've taken your statement literally, and now your message has lost its ironic impact. This paradox also highlights how dependent we are on shared social and cultural contexts to make sense of language. Irony works because there's a mutual understanding between the speaker and the listener that the literal meaning isn't the true message. For example, we might say, "What a beautiful day," when it's clearly stormy outside. The irony lies in the fact that we all know it's not beautiful, but we say it anyway for comedic or dramatic effect. If someone were to take this statement literally, the irony would be lost, and they would likely think we were confused or delusional. But here's the catch: the ability to understand irony isn't universal. Different people have different levels of sensitivity to irony and sarcasm. Some cultures are more direct, while others rely heavily on subtle cues. So, what seems ironic in one culture or to one person may not seem ironic to another. This is why irony can sometimes cause misunderstandings, and it's one of the reasons the irony-intention paradox exists. So, how do we deal with this paradox? It all comes down to context. The more shared understanding there is between the speaker and the listener, the more likely it is that irony will be understood as intended. But even with context, irony can be a tricky thing. People may still misunderstand, especially if they're not familiar with the speaker's style or tone. And when that happens, the speaker's original intention collapses. For example, in a close friendship, one might be more comfortable using sarcasm because they know each other well enough to recognize the intent behind the words. But in a more formal setting, where the relationship is more distant, irony might not land the same way. The listener may not pick up on the subtle cues, and the irony falls flat. One way to avoid this paradox is to be more explicit in communication. If you want to be sarcastic or ironic, you can make sure the listener knows it by giving more clear verbal or nonverbal cues. For example, you could use facial expressions, exaggerated tone, or even clarify your intent afterward. By doing this, you reduce the chances of your irony being misunderstood. But is it always necessary to spell out your irony? Sometimes, the ambiguity is part of the fun. Irony often relies on subtlety and nuance, and part of its charm is in the tension between what is said and what is meant. The irony-intention paradox teaches us that communication isn't always as straightforward as it seems. It's a reminder that language is full of layers and complexities, and what we intend to say may not always match how it's received. In the end, the irony-intention paradox is a fascinating exploration of how we communicate, how language works, and how meaning can be twisted, turned, and sometimes lost in translation. It's a puzzle that reminds us to be careful with our words and to consider how our message might be understood by others. Think about the last time you were waiting for something. Maybe you were waiting for a bus, a friend to show up, or for an event to start. If you were checking the clock, you probably noticed that time seemed to crawl, right? Every minute felt like an eternity. Now, imagine a time when you were doing something fun, maybe hanging out with friends, watching a great movie, or traveling somewhere exciting. Suddenly, hours flew by in what felt like minutes. How is it that time seems to pass at completely different speeds depending on what's happening to us? This is what's at the heart of the time subjectivity paradox. The idea that time appears to pass differently depending on our emotions, our memory, and even our age. The paradox questions whether time is truly objective, something that always moves at the same speed for everyone, or if it's more of a psychological experience that can vary from person to person and moment to moment. At first glance, time seems like something absolute. We all have clocks and calendars, and we measure our lives in hours, days, and years. The world seems to run on a universal clock, ticking steadily for everyone, everywhere. But when you step back and think about how time feels, things get complicated. The way we perceive time isn't always in sync with the actual passage of time. Take a moment to think about a long, boring lecture or a difficult meeting. Time drags on. The hands on the clock barely seem to move. What's going on here? Why does time seem so slow? On the flip side, think about a fun day out with friends or a thrilling activity you love doing. Time flies by in a blink. What makes one moment feel so slow and another so fast? This is where emotions come into play. When we're bored, anxious, or stressed, our perception of time seems to stretch out. Studies show that negative emotions, like stress or fear, can make time feel like it's moving slowly. Our brains are focused on the discomfort, and it feels like the world around us is dragging along with us. On the other hand, when we're enjoying ourselves, our brains are relaxed, and we're not constantly checking the clock. In these moments, time seems to fly because we're focused on the experience, not on measuring the passing seconds. But emotions aren't the only factor influencing how we experience time. Our memory plays a big role too. Have you ever looked back on a vacation or a big event and thought, that went by so quickly? But in the moment, it didn't feel fast at all. Our brains have a way of distorting our memory of time. We remember the highlights of an event, the best parts, and forget the slow moments. That's why, looking back, it seems like time passed quickly, even though, at the time, it might have felt like it was dragging on. This difference between how time feels in the moment versus how we remember it brings up another layer of the paradox. Time is not just about the present moment, it's also about how we reflect on the past. When we remember something, we tend to collapse all the time we spent into one smooth experience, leaving out the details of the slow or boring parts. This distorts our sense of how long things actually took. In fact, when we're older, time seems to pass even faster. Have you ever heard someone say, the older you get, the faster time goes? There's some truth to that. As we accumulate more memories and experiences, each new year feels shorter compared to the years we've already lived. But how do we explain this? Is it just that we're getting used to time, or is it something deeper about how our brains process time as we age? One theory is that when we're younger, we experience more new things. Every year feels like a huge amount of change and growth. But as we get older, we experience fewer new things, and time starts to feel like it's speeding up because we have fewer, new moments to remember. Our brains don't store as many fresh memories, and as a result, the years start to blur together. This brings us to the central question of the time subjectivity paradox. Is time objective or psychological? The objective side says time is something that happens at the same pace for everyone, regardless of what's going on in their heads. If you look at a clock, it's always ticking at the same rate. But the subjective side says time is an experience, something that feels different depending on your emotions, your memory, and even your age. If we rely on our emotions and memories, we might conclude that time is not something fixed, but rather something shaped by how we experience it. So, how do we reconcile these two views? Is time just a clock ticking away, or is it something our minds make up as we live through it? To understand this paradox more clearly, consider a few more examples. Think about a child's birthday. When you're young, your birthday feels like the most important day of the year. It's a big event, and you can't wait for it to arrive. But as you grow older, birthdays don't have the same excitement. They pass by more quickly, almost like any other day. The clock doesn't change, but your experience of the day has shifted. Here's another example. Remember waiting for something as a child, like a holiday or a big event? Those days felt like they would never come. The wait felt endless. But now, as an adult, you probably notice how quickly the months slip by. The same amount of time passes, but your experience of it is completely different. The slower time in childhood, when you're waiting for something big, seems to stretch out compared to the fast-moving years of adulthood. The time subjectivity paradox challenges us to think about what time really is. Is it the ticking of the clock, or is it the way we perceive those ticks? And why does time seem to stretch or compress depending on our circumstances? Could it be that our experience of time is just as important as time itself? One way to resolve this paradox is to acknowledge that time has two sides. The objective, scientific side, where time is measured by clocks and calendars, and the subjective, emotional side, where time feels faster or slower depending on our experiences. Maybe time isn't just one or the other, it's a combination of both. Our brains take the raw, objective passage of time and filter it through emotions, memories, and perceptions. In the end, the time subjectivity paradox isn't something we can easily solve, but it reminds us that time is not just about seconds and minutes. It's about how we live through those moments, how we feel them, and how we remember them. Time might be a fixed measurement in the physical world, but in our minds, it's a constantly shifting experience that's shaped by everything we go through. And maybe that's the most fascinating part of all. Time is both real and imaginary, something that exists in the world and something we create in our minds. It's a paradox that makes us realize that the way we experience life is as important as the way life moves forward. Imagine living in a city that's growing bigger and bigger every year. It's a place where people flock to for work, entertainment, and opportunities. At first, everything seems great. The city has everything: job prospects, vibrant culture, and endless activities. But then, as more people move in, something starts to change. The cost of living rises, the streets get more crowded, and public transport becomes a hassle. It gets harder to find affordable housing, and even the simplest errands feel like a chore because of the overwhelming crowds. Over time, more and more people begin to leave, seeking peace and affordability elsewhere. Cities are no longer the paradise they once seemed to be. But then, something interesting happens. As more people leave, the city begins to feel more manageable. The streets aren't as crowded, the cost of living stabilizes, and housing prices start to drop. Suddenly, the city starts to become attractive again. People who once fled the high prices and congestion begin to return, looking for the opportunities and excitement they once enjoyed. The cycle repeats. This is the urban exodus paradox, a fascinating cycle that happens in many cities around the world. It's the idea that as cities become too crowded or too expensive, people leave, but as enough people leave, the city becomes desirable again. In turn, people return, and the cycle begins once more. To fully understand this paradox, we need to take a closer look at how cities grow and why people move. Cities have always been hubs of economic activity. They attract people because they offer jobs, culture, and connections that aren't easily found in rural areas. This is why cities are constantly growing. As cities grow, they attract even more people, creating a snowball effect. The more people who move in, the more opportunities there are, which draws in even more people. But eventually, cities start to hit a limit. The infrastructure can't keep up with the demand, and the cost of living skyrockets. What was once affordable becomes out of reach for many people. Those who can't keep up with the rising costs or who feel overwhelmed by the crowded streets begin to look for alternatives. They leave for smaller towns or suburban areas where they can find more space, lower prices, and a slower pace of life. Now, here's where the paradox kicks in. As people leave the city, things begin to change. The crowded streets become emptier. The overworked public transport system gets a break. The competition for housing starts to ease and prices fall. Suddenly, the city, which was once overcrowded and expensive, begins to feel like a place worth returning to. The city becomes more livable again, and the cycle starts to turn. People start to move back into the city, seeing it as an opportunity once again. This cycle is driven by several factors. First, the high demand for city living creates an initial push that makes it hard for people to stay. People want to live in cities because of the opportunities, but once too many people want the same thing, it becomes difficult to maintain the lifestyle that drew people in. The city becomes less desirable because of the very thing that made it attractive in the first place: its popularity. But once people leave, the demand goes down. Housing prices stabilize, and the overcrowding issues ease. The city's infrastructure has a chance to catch up. The environment becomes more relaxed, and for those who left, it starts to look like the place they once loved. This new space and lower cost of living make the city appealing once again, causing the cycle to repeat itself. This paradox also has a deeper economic implication. When people leave the city, they often take their wealth with them. This can lead to economic stagnation for a while, especially if the city relies heavily on a dense population for business and tax revenues. However, if the city can adapt to this exodus and reintroduce a more balanced population, it may find new ways to thrive. Businesses that once struggled due to the crowded environment can now operate more efficiently. Public services that were once stretched to the limit can now improve and provide better services to the remaining population. As the city becomes more attractive again, businesses and individuals begin to return, which can drive economic growth. Let's consider a real-world example. Take New York City. At its peak, it was one of the most desirable cities in the world. People from all over the globe flocked to NYC for its job opportunities, entertainment, and cultural vibrancy. But as more people moved in, the cost of living shot up, traffic became unbearable, and housing prices soared. Many families and individuals began to move out of the city, looking for cheaper housing in places like Brooklyn or even in upstate New York. However, over time, those areas that were once considered less desirable started to gentrify. prices began to climb again, and people began to see value in returning to the city. The once crowded streets weren't as crowded anymore, and suddenly, the cultural and economic opportunities were accessible again. New York City, in a way, reinvented itself as a more manageable, livable place. The urban exodus paradox also has social and cultural consequences. As people leave the city, the culture and lifestyle of the urban environment begin to change. Neighborhoods that once felt full of life become quieter and more peaceful. What was once a city teeming with energy can start to feel empty. But when people begin to return, they bring with them new ideas and innovations. The city rejuvenates with fresh energy, and the cycle continues. One of the most interesting aspects of this paradox is how it reflects human behavior and decision-making. We often want what's in front of us, but once we have too much of it, we start to take it for granted. Cities, with their vibrant cultures and abundant opportunities, are often seen as the ultimate destination. But when the crowds and costs become overwhelming, people start to seek out alternatives. Once those alternatives lose their appeal and the city becomes more affordable and manageable, people start to return. The cycle of leaving and returning continues. In some ways, this paradox also mirrors larger patterns in human behavior. People often seek novelty, excitement, and new opportunities, but once they are overwhelmed or dissatisfied, they seek comfort and familiarity elsewhere. This cycle is not limited to cities. It can be seen in many aspects of life, from relationships to career choices to the places we choose to live. In the end, the urban exodus paradox teaches us that cities, like people, go through cycles of growth, stagnation, and renewal. They are shaped by the desires, decisions, and behaviors of the people who inhabit them. As cities grow too crowded or expensive, people leave, but as enough people leave, cities become desirable again, attracting new residents and revitalizing the urban environment. It's a cycle that will continue as long as people search for balance between opportunity, affordability, and quality of life. Language is a living thing. It's constantly evolving, changing, and adapting to the needs of the people who speak it. Over time, words are born, others fade away, and meanings shift. But here's the catch. The very thing that keeps language alive, its ability to change, can also lead to its downfall if it changes too quickly. This is the paradox of living language. Language thrives because it's dynamic, but if it evolves too fast, it can become unintelligible, and eventually, it might even die. To understand this paradox, let's think about how language changes. If you look at English, for example, it's a mix of various languages and influences that have built up over centuries. Words like computer or internet didn't exist a few hundred years ago, but now they are an essential part of daily conversation. These words didn't just appear randomly, they evolved out of necessity as new technologies and concepts emerged. Language, in its most basic sense, is a tool for communication. It's how we share ideas, emotions, and knowledge. But language also adapts to the environment in which it's used. As societies change, so do the words and expressions people use. New words are created to describe new experiences, and older words fade into obscurity as they become irrelevant. For example, think about the word selfie. It didn't exist a decade ago, but now it's something most people use daily. The rise of social media, smartphones, and the culture of sharing personal moments with the world created the need for a new term. And language adapted. Similarly, words like tweet, hashtag, and blog were born out of the rise of technology and the internet. These words reflect the new realities of our lives, and they've quickly become ingrained in our everyday vocabulary. However, while language is constantly changing, the paradox of living language arises when these changes happen too quickly. If the changes in a language are too fast, they can make the language harder to understand, even for native speakers. Think about it. If a new word or phrase becomes popular but is used in place of older, more established terms, those who don't keep up with the change might find it difficult to understand what's being said. This is where the problem lies. For instance, take slang. Every generation has its own set of slang words, and those words evolve rapidly. Words that were popular a decade ago can feel outdated today. For example, in the 1980s, words like rad and gnarly were used to describe something cool. But today, those words sound foreign and almost comical. If someone from the 80s tried to use those words with someone from today's generation, there might be confusion. This is because the language changed, and the faster it changes, the harder it becomes to keep up. The same phenomenon happens in many languages. Take the case of Latin. Latin was the language of the Roman Empire, and it evolved into the Romance languages we know today, such as Spanish, French, and Italian. Over time, the classical Latin that was used by scholars and the elite became more and more distant from the everyday language spoken by the people. As this shift continued, Latin evolved into regional dialects, and those dialects became distinct languages. Latin, as a unified language, eventually became unintelligible to the people who spoke it. In a sense, Latin didn't die. It evolved so much that it split into different languages, which are now unintelligible to each other. This is an example of the paradox of living language. As language evolves and changes, it becomes more alive, more expressive, and more adaptable. But if those changes happen too quickly, the language can lose its unity and become fragmented, making it harder for people to understand one another. Let's look at this from a more modern perspective. Think about how quickly technology has changed language. Just a few years ago, terms like app, streaming, or cloud storage were not part of common vocabulary. Now, these terms are used every day by millions of people. The speed at which new words are being added to the language is increasing because technology is advancing faster than ever before. This can make communication between people from different generations, or even people from different cultural backgrounds, more difficult. But the speed of change is not just about new words. It's also about how we use language. Grammar, syntax, and the way we structure sentences have also evolved. In casual conversation, many people now use abbreviations, shortcuts, and emojis, especially in online communication. Texting has introduced a whole new style of writing, where brevity and speed are more important than traditional grammar rules. For example, LOL, OMG, and BRB are used all the time, and they're understood by people in the context of texting. But imagine trying to write an academic paper or a formal letter using this style. It would be confusing, and it would lose its clarity. In this case, the fast evolution of language, especially in online and casual settings, can make formal communication harder and less effective. Another aspect of this paradox is the role of regional dialects. Different communities and cultures often create their own versions of a language, and this can be a beautiful expression of local identity. However, when these dialects diverge too far from the standard or common form of the language, it can create barriers. In extreme cases, languages can become so fragmented that they cease to be mutually intelligible, just like the way Latin evolved into distinct Romance languages. Imagine trying to communicate with someone from another country who speaks the same language but uses a completely different dialect. Even though you both speak English, the differences in vocabulary, pronunciation, and expression could make communication difficult. The paradox of living language shows that language must find a balance between change and stability. If a language changes too slowly, it risks becoming outdated, rigid, and disconnected from the needs of the people who speak it. But if it changes too quickly, it risks becoming fragmented and unintelligible. In order for a language to thrive, it must evolve at a pace that allows it to stay relevant while still being understood by its speakers. There's a certain beauty in the fluidity of language. The fact that it can adapt to new technologies, new ideas, and new social contexts is a testament to its resilience and its ability to reflect the lives of those who use it. But this same flexibility is also what makes language vulnerable to becoming incoherent when the changes happen too rapidly. This paradox also forces us to ask questions about the future of language. Will we reach a point where the pace of change becomes unsustainable? As technology continues to develop, and as different cultural groups and communities continue to influence each other, will we see more fragmentation in language? Or will we find a way to balance innovation with tradition, ensuring that the language remains a useful tool for communication without losing its ability to connect people across time and space? In the end, The paradox of living language challenges us to think about how we communicate and how language reflects the world we live in. It's a reminder that, like everything in life, language is both a product of its environment and a force that shapes that environment. It's alive, always growing, always changing, but at the same time, it needs to be understood in order to survive. Imagine you're trying to save money. You become really focused on cutting every possible cost, whether it's skipping your daily coffee, hunting for discounts on small items, or finding the cheapest possible option for everything you buy. You've heard the phrase, save today, spend tomorrow, and believe the more you save now, the better off you'll be in the future. It feels good at first, right? The more you save, the more money you accumulate, and the more secure your future seems. But what if trying to save too much money ends up costing you more in the long run? This is the frugality paradox, the idea that trying to save money by being overly frugal can sometimes lead to greater costs, inefficiency, or missed opportunities. The very act of trying to save every penny can sometimes have the opposite effect of what you intend, leading to a loss rather than a gain. Let's break this down with some examples. Take the classic case of buying cheap items to save money. Imagine you buy a pair of inexpensive shoes because they are on sale, thinking that you're making a great financial decision. But after a few weeks of wearing them, you notice they're uncomfortable, they don't last as long as you hoped, and you end up spending more money replacing them than you would have spent on a higher quality pair of shoes in the first place. In your effort to save money, you end up with a lower quality product that leads to more spending in the long run. The goal of frugality, saving money, backfires, and you find yourself in a cycle of constantly replacing low-cost items that wear out quickly. This is a clear example of the frugality paradox. By trying to save money in the short term, you end up losing more in the long term because of the hidden costs associated with lower quality choices. This paradox doesn't just apply to material goods. It can affect nearly every aspect of life, from time management to relationships and even investments. Another example of this paradox can be found in the workplace. Imagine a business owner who tries to save money by cutting costs in critical areas, such as hiring fewer employees or reducing training budgets. While this might save money in the short term, it can lead to bigger problems later on. The business might struggle to keep up with the growing demands of its customers because there aren't enough employees to handle the workload. Employees might become overworked and burned out because they were never properly trained. This inefficiency can hurt the business in the long run, leading to a loss of revenue or even causing the company to fail. The frugality paradox is also evident in personal finances. Many people get caught up in trying to save money on small purchases while neglecting to invest in things that could improve their financial future. For example, you might spend hours clipping coupons and comparing prices for groceries, all while ignoring the opportunity to invest in a retirement fund or a high-yield savings account. The time and energy spent on saving small amounts of money could be better spent on making smarter financial decisions that have long-term benefits. By focusing too much on saving today, you might miss out on the opportunity to secure a better financial future tomorrow. The paradox becomes even clearer when we look at missed opportunities. For example, a person might avoid spending money on experiences that could improve their well-being, such as traveling, taking a course to develop a new skill, or even going out to dinner with friends. While they may save money in the short term, the long-term cost of missing out on personal growth, enjoyment, and social connections can be far greater. In these cases, being overly frugal doesn't just mean a loss of money, it also means a loss of happiness, personal development, and opportunities to enrich your life. One of the main reasons the frugality paradox occurs is that it's easy to focus on the small picture while ignoring the big picture. Saving money is important, but so is spending money wisely. It's easy to get fixated on cutting small, everyday expenses without considering how those savings fit into the larger context of your financial goals or personal well-being. In fact, some of the most important purchases, whether they're investments in your health, education, or future, require spending money up front. If you're constantly trying to avoid spending, you might miss out on opportunities that would lead to greater returns later. Let's consider an example from a different angle. You could be living in a place that's cheap but inconvenient. For example, you might be living in a neighborhood that's far from your workplace or social activities, just to save on rent. In the short term, you might think you're saving money, But in the long run, the time you spend commuting, the stress you feel from being far away from everything, and the missed opportunities for networking or socializing all take a toll on your life. What might seem like a smart financial decision at first can end up costing you more time, energy, and potential in the long run. This paradox isn't just about money, it's about the balance between sacrifice and reward. While frugality can be a virtue, it becomes a problem when it's taken to extremes. The constant pursuit of savings can lead to inefficiency and unnecessary sacrifice, whether it's in personal relationships, career growth, or your own well-being. Being too focused on saving money can lead to a scarcity mindset, where you focus only on what you don't have, rather than what you can gain by making smart investments in yourself and your future. The frugality paradox reminds us that, like anything in life, there's a point where trying to save too much can lead to diminishing returns. It's important to recognize that saving money is only one part of the equation. How you spend your money is just as important, if not more so. The goal isn't to save every penny, but to make conscious, thoughtful decisions that align with your values, goals, and long-term happiness. In some cases, investing in things that make your life easier, healthier, or more fulfilling might save you money in the long run, even though it requires an initial investment. For example, spending money on a gym membership or a healthy meal plan might seem like an extra expense, but it could lead to better health, fewer medical bills, and a higher quality of life. Similarly, investing in your education or career development might require spending money upfront, but the long-term benefits can far outweigh the cost. The frugality paradox shows us that being overly focused on cutting every corner can lead to unintended consequences. By finding a balance between saving and spending wisely, we can avoid the traps of inefficiency and missed opportunities. The key to smart frugality isn't about avoiding all costs. It's about knowing when to spend and when to save, and making sure that your spending is an investment in your long-term well-being and success. In the end, the paradox isn't just about money, it's about life balance. A frugal mindset can be valuable, but it shouldn't come at the expense of your happiness, health, or future opportunities. By recognizing when frugality becomes counterproductive, we can make better choices that lead to a more prosperous and fulfilling life. Imagine you've been working on a big project for months. You've invested countless hours, money, and energy into it, and it seems like no matter how much effort you put in, things aren't working out. The project isn't bringing the results you expected, and it's becoming increasingly clear that it might fail. But instead of quitting and cutting your losses, you decide to keep going. Because you've already invested so much into it, and it feels wrong to give up now. This is a classic example of the sunk cost paradox. The idea that people continue investing in a failing endeavor because they've already put so much into it, even when quitting would actually be the smarter choice. The sunk cost paradox is rooted in our tendency to avoid admitting that our previous investments have been wasted, even when logic tells us that cutting our losses and moving on is the best option. Let's break this down with a more relatable example. Imagine you're at the movie theater, and you've already paid for your ticket. But after the first 30 minutes, you realize that the movie is terrible. It's boring, slow, and just not worth your time. You start thinking, I should leave, but then you pause and think about the money you spent on the ticket. I've already paid for this, you tell yourself, so I might as well stay and get my money's worth. Even though you're not enjoying the movie, you continue watching, thinking that leaving would be a waste of the money you spent. In reality, the money you've already spent on the ticket is a sunk cost. It's money that's already gone and can't be recovered. The smarter decision would be to leave the theater and spend your time doing something more enjoyable. But because of the sunk cost paradox, you stick it out, not realizing that staying just means you're wasting more of your time and energy, which are also valuable resources. This paradox is everywhere in life. It's not just about movie tickets. It happens in business, relationships, personal projects, and even our day-to-day decisions. The sunk cost fallacy can make us feel like we need to continue putting time, money, and effort into something simply because we've already invested so much. But the truth is, this often leads to bigger losses, and it prevents us from making better decisions going forward. Let's consider a business example. A company has been working on a product for years, but despite all the effort, the product just isn't selling. The market is saturated, and customers aren't interested. At this point, the company faces a decision. Should they continue pouring money into the product in the hopes that things will turn around, or should they cut their losses, discontinue the product, and shift focus to something more promising? If the company continues investing in the product because of the money, time, and resources they've already spent, they're falling into the sunk cost paradox. By ignoring the fact that continuing to invest in a failing product won't bring any return, they're wasting more resources that could be better spent on a new, more viable project. The sunk costs are already gone. They can't be recovered. But the desire to get something out of those previous investments leads to irrational decision-making. This paradox also shows up in relationships. Let's say you've been in a relationship for years, but it's not fulfilling and it's becoming clear that you're not compatible with your partner anymore. The relationship is causing stress and unhappiness. But you hesitate to break up because you've already invested so much time and energy into it. You think, I've already been with this person for so long, I can't just walk away now. But by staying in a bad relationship out of a sense of obligation or guilt for the time spent, you're neglecting your own well-being and happiness. Again, the sunk cost paradox makes it difficult to walk away from a situation that isn't working because of the emotional and practical investments already made. It's hard to admit that something hasn't worked out, and it feels like quitting would mean all the effort was wasted. But the reality is, by staying in the relationship, you're continuing to invest more in something that isn't giving you any return. The smarter choice would be to leave, acknowledge the sunk cost, and move on to a situation where you can have a more fulfilling experience. The sunk cost paradox is deeply tied to our natural desire for consistency and our aversion to loss. We don't like the idea of wasting what we've already put into something, even when logic tells us that moving on would be better. This is known as loss aversion, a cognitive bias that makes us fear losses more than we value gains. So, even though quitting would be the rational choice, we keep going because of the discomfort of acknowledging that our previous decisions were wrong or misguided. Another example of the sunk cost paradox can be found in personal projects. Let's say you've been working on writing a book for years. You've written hundreds of pages, but you're not happy with what you've created. It's not coming together, and the story isn't what you imagined. However, instead of abandoning the project and starting fresh, you push yourself to continue, telling yourself, I've already written so much, I can't just give up now. In reality, the best option might be to walk away from the book, reassess your goals, and work on something new. The pages you've already written are sunk costs. They won't bring any value if you keep going down a path that's clearly not working. But the paradox keeps you locked into the idea of finishing what you started, even if it means more frustration and wasted effort. The sunk cost paradox often blinds us to better opportunities. In fact, by continuing to invest in something that's no longer viable, we can miss out on new ventures or ideas that have a much higher chance of success. Let's say you're in a job that you've been at for years. You've invested a lot of time and energy into the role, but you're no longer satisfied, and you're not moving forward. However, because of the sunk costs, your years of service, the effort you've put in, you feel trapped. You're afraid to quit because of all the time and effort already spent. But by staying in a job that doesn't fulfill you, you're preventing yourself from exploring new opportunities that could bring you both satisfaction and growth. You've already invested so much, but at some point, you need to ask yourself whether staying is really worth it. The sunk cost paradox makes us forget that the future is more important than the past, and it often keeps us stuck in unproductive or unhappy situations. So how do we overcome the sunk cost paradox? The key is to recognize that the resources you've already invested, whether time, money, or emotional energy, are gone. They can't be recovered, no matter how much you try to salvage the situation. The smarter decision is to assess your current situation and future prospects, rather than continuing to pour resources into something that's already failing. In business, in relationships, and in life, learning to let go and move on is a crucial skill. It's important to be able to say, I've put in a lot, but it's not working. It's time to cut my losses and focus on something that will bring me better results. By recognizing the sunk cost fallacy, we can make smarter, more rational decisions that lead to better outcomes in the long run. In the end, the sunk cost paradox teaches us an important lesson. The best way to move forward is to focus on what we can control in the present and future, rather than being held back by past investments. By letting go of what's not working, we free ourselves to make better choices and create a more successful, fulfilling future. Imagine you're planning a busy day. You have a long to-do list, meetings to attend, errands to run, emails to respond to, and a dozen other things that demand your attention. The question is, how do you know which task to prioritize first? You want to be efficient, but how can you determine what really matters most? This is the essence of Aristotle's priority paradox. How can we prioritize things without knowing what matters most? And yet, how can we know what matters most without first prioritizing? The paradox suggests that prioritization itself relies on an act of judgment that requires us to already have some understanding of what is important, even though that understanding can only be formed after we've made decisions about what to prioritize. Let's break this down. At first glance, this might sound like a puzzle without a solution. How can you determine what matters if you haven't yet chosen what to focus on? How do you make choices about what to prioritize without first knowing what matters? This creates a circular problem. We need to know what's most important in order to make choices, but we can't determine what's most important without first making those choices. This paradox is actually tied to how we make decisions in life. Think about it. Whenever you face a task or challenge, you're constantly trying to figure out what to focus on. In the world of work, for instance, you might have multiple projects and responsibilities, each pulling your attention in different directions. At first, it's hard to decide where to begin, and often, the act of starting a task helps you determine its significance in relation to everything else. You might begin by tackling a small, quick task, and in the process, you realize that this task is connected to something larger, and it becomes clear what really needs to be prioritized next. Now, let's think about an example that illustrates this paradox. You're at work, and you have two tasks. One is an urgent project with a tight deadline, and the other is a longer-term project that doesn't have a pressing deadline but could be equally important. Which one do you prioritize? At first, it may seem clear. You focus on the urgent project. But once you begin working on it, you may realize that your long-term project is actually crucial for your career growth or personal development. The urgency of the first task distracts you from seeing the bigger picture of what truly matters in the long run. The priority paradox comes into play here. How do you know that the long-term project is important unless you begin working on it, in which case, you've already prioritized something else? You can't prioritize effectively without first trying to prioritize, but you can't fully understand what needs prioritizing until you make a decision about what to work on. This paradox can also be applied to decision-making in general. When we're faced with complex decisions, whether it's about our careers, relationships, or personal goals, we often start by making small decisions, and as we go, we gain a clearer understanding of what matters most. But in order to make those initial decisions, we must have some sense of what is important, even if it's based on incomplete information. As we make choices, we refine our understanding of what truly matters, but we can't know what matters most until we start making those choices. Another example can be found in personal growth and goal setting. Think about someone trying to improve their physical health. They might start by setting a goal to lose weight, but as they begin their journey, they realize that overall wellness and strength matter more to them than just the number on a scale. This deeper understanding of what truly matters comes only after they start prioritizing their physical health. In this case, their initial decision to focus on weight loss was a form of prioritization, but as they progressed, they adjusted their focus to what mattered more in the long term. The paradox is especially relevant in a world that demands efficiency and speed. We are constantly told to make decisions quickly, whether it's about our time, finances, or career path. But the pressure to make fast choices often leads to shallow prioritization. When we don't have time to reflect on what really matters, we default to what feels urgent or easy. But these decisions might not reflect our true priorities, and in hindsight, we may realize that we missed an opportunity to focus on what would have been more beneficial in the long run. Consider the example of someone planning their financial future. They might prioritize short-term goals, such as paying off a small loan or saving for a vacation. But in the process, they overlook more significant financial goals, like saving for retirement or investing in long-term assets. Without the clarity of knowing what matters most, they prioritize what seems important at the moment. However, once they've achieved their short-term goals, they may realize they missed the chance to secure their financial future. This is the Aristotle's priority paradox in action. By focusing on what seems most urgent, they missed a deeper, more meaningful priority. So how do we resolve this paradox? How can we prioritize without knowing what matters most? And how can we know what matters most without prioritizing? The key lies in the concept of trial and error. Decision-making, in many ways, is a process of discovery. When we make a decision, even a small one, it helps us learn more about what truly matters to us. In the process, we gain clarity about our larger priorities. This is why it's often said that experience is the best teacher. By making choices and then reflecting on their outcomes, we gain a better understanding of what's truly important. We start with small decisions, and through those decisions, we develop a clearer sense of our deeper values and priorities. Once we gain this understanding, we can make better choices going forward. Another way to resolve the paradox is to take a step back and reflect on your long-term goals. It's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of daily tasks and short-term urgencies, but periodically stepping back and considering the bigger picture can help us prioritize more effectively. This approach doesn't necessarily give us all the answers up front, but it helps us create a foundation for making more informed decisions about what truly matters. In relationships, this paradox is often at play as well. We may invest time and effort into a relationship, not fully understanding its importance until we begin to understand the deeper connection we share with that person. Only after investing time do we realize whether the relationship truly matters, but the initial commitment to prioritizing it helps clarify its value. At a broader societal level, the paradox also influences how we approach social issues and global challenges. For example, addressing climate change requires prioritizing long-term sustainability, but without early investments in clean energy or environmental policies, we wouldn't know which solutions are most effective. In this sense, making decisions about what to prioritize, such as green technologies or sustainable practices, helps reveal which actions are most impactful, even though we can't fully predict their results until we start acting. In the end, Aristotle's priority paradox teaches us that prioritization is a dynamic process. We begin by making decisions based on what we think matters, and through those decisions, we learn more about what truly deserves our attention. The paradox highlights the importance of being flexible and open to reevaluating our priorities as we move forward. It's not about knowing everything up front. It's about starting somewhere, making choices, and refining our understanding of what truly matters as we go. The paradox isn't a problem to solve, but a reminder that prioritization is an ongoing journey. We don't have to have all the answers before we begin. We simply need to start making decisions, and in doing so, we gain a clearer picture of what matters most in our lives. By embracing the trial and error process of prioritization, we can navigate life more effectively and make choices that reflect our true values and goals. Imagine you have a perfectly clean, clear pool of water. It's pure, fresh, and uncontaminated, just as it should be. But now, think about a tiny drop, just one small drop, of impure water. Maybe it's from a dirty puddle, or it contains a bit of dye, or it's mixed with a small amount of oil. You drop this tiny impure drop into the clean pool. Now, the question arises, has the entire pool of water become impure just because of that one drop? Can the purity of something be compromised by a tiny amount of impurity? This is the core of the impure drop paradox, which raises deep philosophical questions about thresholds, purity, and how we perceive what's clean or unclean. Let's break it down. At first glance, it seems like a tiny drop wouldn't change much. It's a small amount compared to the entire volume of the pool. Surely, the pool remains mostly clean, right? After all, one drop can't possibly contaminate a whole body of water. But the paradox begins when we challenge this intuition. If you add that one drop of impurity, does it change the entire nature of the pool? How much impurity is needed before the pool is no longer clean? Think about a similar situation. Imagine you're cooking and you're making a big pot of soup. You've carefully selected fresh ingredients, and everything looks great. But then, as you're cooking, you accidentally drop a tiny bit of salt that fell off the edge of your counter. It's just a pinch, hardly noticeable. Does that tiny pinch of salt make the entire pot of soup salty now? Or is the soup still considered fresh and pure, despite that small amount of salt? In both cases, the pool and the soup, we're grappling with the concept of thresholds. How much impurity does it take for something to no longer be considered pure or whole? The impure drop paradox asks us to consider whether purity is a black and white concept, or if it's a matter of degree. Is something still pure if it's 99.9% clean, or does the tiniest impurity mean it's no longer pure at all? The paradox raises another important question. Where do we draw the line? If the impurity of the drop is so small, do we ignore it? Do we say that it's insignificant and the pool or soup is still good? Or do we acknowledge that even a tiny amount of impurity can change the whole thing? The answer often depends on how we define purity in the first place. In some cases, we might say that a small amount of impurity doesn't matter. After all, the pool of water still looks mostly clear and the soup still tastes fresh. But in other situations, we might argue that any amount of impurity is enough to compromise the whole thing. This is especially true in situations where we hold things to higher standards, like in science, health, or morality. Let's take a more extreme example. Suppose you're working with a laboratory sample where purity is of the utmost importance. If you're mixing chemicals to create a precise reaction, even a tiny impurity, like a speck of dust or a single drop of foreign substance, could ruin the whole experiment. In this case, we wouldn't say that the experiment is still pure or safe just because the impurity was small. A tiny bit of contamination could change everything, making the entire experiment invalid or dangerous. This leads us to another layer of the paradox. What happens when you add more than one drop of impurity? Let's say the first drop wasn't enough to make the pool impure, but then you add another and another. At some point, the pool becomes visibly murky, and we can easily say it's no longer pure. So, is there a tipping point, a specific threshold, where something that was once pure becomes impure? This idea of a threshold is important in many areas of life. In medicine, for instance, a small amount of a harmful substance might not pose an immediate risk, but over time, the cumulative effect could lead to illness. Similarly, when we talk about environmental pollution, even a tiny amount of contamination can eventually cause widespread damage. In these contexts, purity isn't just about one drop or one instance. It's about the cumulative effect and how small impurities can add up to create a larger problem. The impure drop paradox also has moral and ethical implications. In society, we often view purity as a value. For example, we might talk about pure intentions, pure motives, or a pure heart. But if a person has even a small flaw, a mistake, or a bad decision in their past, does that make them impure or unworthy? In many cases, a single mistake or small flaw might be overlooked, and we might say that a person is still fundamentally good or pure. But in other cases, even a tiny mistake can be used to judge someone harshly, changing the way others view them. This paradox also shows up in the idea of perfectionism. Many people strive to achieve perfection in their work, their appearance, or their character. But the paradox asks, if perfection is only the absence of imperfection, how much imperfection is too much before we no longer consider something perfect? If you get 99% of the way to perfection, can you still call it perfect? Or does the 1% imperfection destroy the whole thing? The impure drop paradox forces us to rethink our ideas of purity and imperfection. It challenges the idea that something can be pure or impure in a simple all-or-nothing way. In fact, purity often exists on a spectrum, and we need to consider the context and the consequences of the impurity before we decide how much it matters. There's also the question of how we deal with the consequences of impurity. If we're talking about a pool of water, one drop might seem insignificant, but if it causes harm, such as making the... Have you ever found yourself on a quest for happiness? Maybe you've tried everything, buying things, going on trips, achieving goals, or surrounding yourself with the right people, all in the hope of finding that elusive feeling of pure happiness. The more you try to chase it, the more it seems to slip through your fingers, like trying to catch a cloud or hold onto a breeze. The more effort you put in, the harder it seems to find. This is the happiness paradox. The more you chase happiness, the more elusive it becomes. But here's the twist. Deciding to stop seeking it doesn't guarantee that happiness will come either. In fact, sometimes the harder you try to ignore it, the more it seems to slip away just when you least expect it. The idea that happiness can be elusive seems to run counter to everything we're taught. From a young age, we're encouraged to seek out happiness. We're told that if we work hard, make the right choices, and surround ourselves with positive influences, happiness will eventually come. The problem is that this pursuit of happiness often creates an endless loop. You keep thinking that happiness is just around the corner, always a little bit out of reach. Let's break this paradox down with a simple example. Imagine you're working toward a major goal, like getting a promotion at work. You focus all your energy on achieving that promotion, thinking that once you reach it, you'll finally be happy. You work long hours, push yourself hard, and make sacrifices to meet the demands of the job. But once you get the promotion, you realize something unexpected. While you're pleased, happiness doesn't arrive in the way you imagined. Instead of feeling content, you feel the weight of even greater responsibility, more stress, and less free time. You're no longer just trying to achieve happiness, you're constantly striving to maintain it. The pursuit of happiness, in this case, leads to disappointment because you expected it to come from the external goal, not realizing that true happiness may come from other, less tangible sources. This brings us to the happiness paradox. The more you chase happiness through external accomplishments, the more it slips away. It's like running after something that keeps moving further ahead. Every time you think you've caught it, it moves farther, and you're left feeling frustrated and empty. But here's the paradoxical twist. Choosing not to chase happiness doesn't automatically make it appear either. If you stop focusing on happiness altogether, you might think it will just come naturally, but often, it doesn't. In fact, in many cases, trying to ignore happiness can make you feel even more discontented. For example, if you focus too much on the idea that happiness isn't the goal, living a meaningful life is, you might end up chasing meaning without really feeling fulfilled. While you're not actively pursuing happiness, you're still chasing something else, and in doing so, you may never fully relax into contentment. This is where the happiness paradox becomes tricky. If you focus on happiness, it becomes harder to achieve, but if you try to ignore it, it often feels like it slips away even more. It's a situation where the more attention you give to it, the more it seems to elude you, yet turning your back on it doesn't necessarily bring you peace either. Let's look at another example. Many people say that the key to happiness is to live in the moment, to appreciate what you have right now, rather than constantly chasing something more. This sounds great, but when you try to live in the moment while you're constantly thinking about how to make your life better, you're still chasing happiness. You might be telling yourself, I should be content with what I have, but at the same time, your mind is preoccupied with what you don't have or what you wish you could change. This creates a tension between accepting the present and longing for a future that feels happier or more fulfilling. This paradox can also be seen in the context of relationships. Think about the pressure people sometimes put on themselves to find the one. The more you obsess over finding the perfect partner, the more difficult it becomes to actually connect with someone authentically. The pursuit of the perfect relationship can often feel like an unattainable goal. But when you stop searching so hard, when you let go of the idea of a perfect partner, relationships often bloom naturally. The paradox here is clear. Sometimes chasing something, whether it's happiness or love, makes it harder to find. Letting go of the chase can ironically bring what you seek. The happiness paradox can also be observed in the context of wealth. People often believe that acquiring more money will bring them more happiness. So, they chase money, working long hours, sacrificing personal time, and pushing themselves harder and harder. But studies show that after a certain point, increased income doesn't lead to greater happiness. People who focus on accumulating wealth often feel dissatisfied, while those who focus on other aspects of life, such as relationships and personal fulfillment, tend to feel more content. The paradox here is that the pursuit of money in the hope of happiness often leads to stress and emptiness, rather than satisfaction. Another aspect of this paradox is the way we think about time. We're often told that time is precious, that we should make the most of every moment in order to be happy. But when we focus too much on the idea of using our time to be happy, we can miss the present moment entirely. If you're always chasing the next big thing, whether it's a career milestone, a perfect vacation, or a personal achievement, you might look back and realize that you missed out on the small, simple pleasures that could have made you happy all along. The happiness paradox shows us that while striving for happiness is natural, it often prevents us from truly experiencing it. The paradox can even be seen in the way we seek validation from others. Many people pursue happiness by trying to gain approval or recognition from friends, family, or society. This external validation can provide a temporary sense of happiness, but it's often fleeting. The more you seek validation, the less authentic your happiness becomes, and you can start to feel like you're living for someone else rather than for yourself. The happiness paradox shows us that the pursuit of external approval can actually diminish our happiness, as it relies on something outside our control. So how do we resolve this paradox? How can we find happiness without obsessing over it? The key might lie in acceptance and balance. Instead of focusing on happiness as an external goal that must be reached, we can shift our mindset to appreciate the present moment and the simple joys that life offers. This doesn't mean giving up on pursuing meaningful goals or striving for improvement. It just means letting go of the idea that happiness is a destination to be reached through constant striving. One approach is to focus on meaningful activities that bring you fulfillment, rather than chasing happiness directly. Engaging in hobbies you love, spending time with people who make you feel good, or contributing to something larger than yourself can all provide a deeper sense of satisfaction. These activities may not always feel like happiness in the traditional sense, but over time, they can bring a sense of peace and contentment. The happiness paradox also suggests that happiness might be found in letting go of the expectation that it will always be a constant, perfect feeling. Instead of expecting to always feel euphoric or excited, we can find happiness in small moments of peace, joy, and connection. Happiness becomes less about chasing an ideal and more about embracing the ups and downs of life with a sense of contentment. The paradox challenges us to rethink what happiness really means. It encourages us to let go of the pressure to be constantly happy and to focus on the things that bring us fulfillment, even if they don't always feel like happiness. By doing this, we may find that happiness comes naturally, without us having to chase it. Ultimately, the happiness paradox teaches us that while happiness is a desirable goal, it's not something we can grab by force or willpower alone. Instead, it's something that emerges naturally when we live authentically, appreciate the present, and let go of the constant pursuit of perfection. Paradoxically, when we stop chasing happiness so desperately, we may find it right where we are, in the moments we least expect. Imagine you've just seen a controversial advertisement on TV. Maybe it was bold, maybe it was offensive, or maybe it was just plain shocking. But here's the twist. Despite all the negative reactions, the brand behind the ad is now more popular than ever. People are talking about it. Everyone's sharing opinions, debating whether the ad was clever or inappropriate. Some people are angry, but others are intrigued, and in the end, more people are now aware of the brand. It sounds strange, right? But this is exactly what's known as the negative advertising paradox. The idea that negative publicity, especially when it's controversial, can actually make a brand more popular, drawing more attention and even creating a boost in sales or recognition. At first glance, negative advertising might seem like a terrible idea. After all, who would want to associate their brand with something negative? Most businesses try to avoid controversy and focus on positive, feel-good campaigns that make people like them more. But sometimes the opposite happens. Negative ads or publicity can generate so much attention that they become more memorable and people become more interested in the brand, for better or worse. The negative advertising paradox is rooted in human nature. We live in a world where attention is incredibly valuable. People are bombarded with messages all day, every day, from billboards to social media, TV ads to sponsored posts. With all this noise, it's easy for a brand to get lost in the crowd. So, how does a brand stand out? Often, controversy is the answer. When a brand does something that's bold, edgy, or even offensive, it sparks conversation. And as we all know, conversation is a powerful tool for gaining attention. Take, for example, some of the most famous controversial ads from brands over the years. In the 1990s, the brand Benetton became infamous for its bold ads featuring shocking images, such as a photograph of a dying AIDS patient or a controversial image of a priest and a nun kissing. Many people were offended by these ads, calling them distasteful and in poor taste. But despite the negative backlash, the ads generated massive amounts of media attention and discussion. People were talking about Benetton, and in the end, this attention helped the brand stand out. The negative advertising paradox was at play. By using controversial ads, Benetton became more memorable and its name became more widely recognized. Another example is the fast food chain Wendy's. In 2017, Wendy's launched a social media campaign that included humorous and sometimes snarky interactions with customers. These interactions, particularly the brand's witty comebacks to negative comments on Twitter, drew significant attention. While some people found Wendy's tone sharp or sarcastic, many people loved the brand's personality. Wendy's didn't shy away from controversy. Instead, it leaned into it, using humor and sass to stand out. The controversy created buzz, and people became more engaged with the brand. The paradox isn't just about direct advertisement, though. Negative publicity can also come from outside forces. Let's look at the example of Apple. In the early 2000s, Apple's rival, Microsoft, launched a series of ads targeting the iPod, mocking its design and its lack of features compared to other MP3 players. These ads were negative towards Apple, but they only seemed to drive more attention to the iPod and Apple's products. In fact, it gave Apple the perfect opportunity to double down on its sleek, user-friendly branding. Microsoft's negative ads, in the end, might have been intended to hurt Apple's image, but they actually helped Apple rise above the competition by making its products even more desirable. So why does negative advertising work? The key lies in our psychology. When we hear something negative, it triggers our curiosity. We want to know more. Our brains are wired to pay attention to things that might be threatening or controversial as a survival mechanism. Negative publicity taps into this instinct, creating a sense of urgency and intrigue. People start asking, what's the deal with this brand? And even if they don't like it, they may still check it out of curiosity. The controversy surrounding the brand becomes a conversation starter, and the more people talk about it, the more attention the brand gets. It's a cycle that feeds itself. But the negative advertising paradox is not without risks. While negative publicity can create a temporary boost in attention and recognition, it can also backfire. If the controversy goes too far, it can alienate customers or damage the brand's reputation permanently. For example, Pepsi's infamous ad featuring Kendall Jenner in 2017, which trivialized protest movements, faced major backlash. Many people felt that the ad was tone-deaf and appropriated social justice movements for commercial gain. While the ad generated attention, the brand's attempt to profit from controversial themes led to widespread criticism. In this case, negative publicity didn't translate into long-term success for Pepsi. It damaged their reputation and hurt their image in the eyes of many consumers. The lesson here is that negative publicity can work, but it needs to be carefully managed. The key is knowing when to push the envelope and when to stop. Brands that can navigate the fine line between controversy and tastefulness can benefit from the negative advertising paradox, while those that cross the line too far may end up doing more harm than good. There's also a broader cultural aspect at play. In today's world, we're living in a time of constant media saturation. Social media has made it easier than ever for brands to get attention, but it's also made it harder for them to stand out. A brand can put out the most beautiful, heartwarming ad, but it might get lost in the noise. In contrast, an ad that's bold, edgy, or controversial can cut through that noise and spark conversation. In a world where attention is so valuable, controversy can be a tool to grab that attention and make people stop scrolling. This isn't to say that controversy is always the best approach. It's a tool, one that can be wielded effectively or disastrously, depending on the context. The negative advertising paradox is also relevant when we look at how brands recover from scandals. Sometimes, the controversy surrounding a brand can be a chance for them to reinvent themselves. Take Nike, for example. In 2018, Nike faced significant backlash for featuring Colin Kaepernick in an ad, a man who had become a controversial figure after kneeling during the national anthem to protest racial injustice. The backlash was immediate, with some people burning their Nike products in protest. But Nike's sales actually increased after the ad aired. By taking a stand on a divisive issue, Nike not only garnered attention but also resonated with consumers who supported Kaepernick's stance. In this case, the controversy worked in Nike's favor, turning negative publicity into a powerful marketing tool. The paradox also highlights the unpredictable nature of advertising. Sometimes, it's hard to predict how the public will react to a controversial campaign. An ad that seems daring and innovative could end up being perceived as offensive, while a campaign that seems risky could be embraced by a large audience. The key is finding the right balance and understanding your audience. Brands that can navigate this paradox successfully often do so by staying true to their values while also being willing to take calculated risks that might draw attention. The negative advertising paradox also taps into our culture's fascination with conflict. Humans are naturally drawn to drama, debate, and differing viewpoints. Controversial ads make people talk, and when people talk, they spread the word. This viral effect is something that brands can take advantage of, especially in the digital age, where word of mouth and social media influence are so powerful. A controversial ad campaign can become a talking point, and that conversation, whether positive or negative, boosts visibility. In conclusion, the negative advertising paradox is a fascinating phenomenon that shows how controversy, when used wisely, can become a powerful tool for gaining attention and increasing a brand's popularity. While negative publicity can backfire and harm a brand's reputation, when handled well, it can be a powerful way to stand out and make an impact. Brands that understand the dynamics of attention, controversy, and timing can turn negative publicity into an opportunity for growth, all while keeping their finger on the pulse of their audience's values and expectations. Imagine a country going through an economic crisis. Unemployment is rising, businesses are closing, and many people are struggling to make ends meet. On the surface, it seems like a time of hardship for everyone. But here's the surprising part. While the majority of people are facing economic difficulties, there are some individuals and even entire industries that are making record profits. The rich are getting richer while the rest are getting poorer. This is the essence of the wealth in crisis paradox. The idea that, during times of economic crisis, some people or nations can actually become wealthier, highlighting deeper issues of inequality and exploitation within the economic system. At first glance, this paradox seems counterintuitive. How can anyone get richer when the economy is collapsing? Isn't a crisis supposed to affect everyone equally? The answer lies in the structure of the economic system itself, which, in many cases, creates conditions where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority suffers. Let's take a closer look at how this works. During an economic crisis, such as a recession or financial collapse, the value of assets often fluctuates. For most people, this means the value of their savings, investments, or homes decreases. People lose jobs, businesses close down, and overall, the economy contracts. However, for the wealthy, this crisis can present an opportunity. Many of the richest individuals and companies are able to buy up distressed assets at lower prices, invest in struggling industries, or take advantage of government bailouts and stimulus packages. For example, during the 2008 global financial crisis, many of the world's largest banks were bailed out by governments to prevent a complete collapse. While ordinary people were losing their homes, jobs, and savings, these financial institutions were receiving government support, allowing them to survive and even profit from the crisis. In some cases, they came out of the crisis stronger than ever, having acquired smaller competitors, seized market share, and further consolidated their power. Similarly, large corporations, especially in industries like pharmaceuticals, technology, and defense, can often profit during times of crisis. In the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, major pharmaceutical companies saw massive profits due to the development of vaccines and treatments, while smaller businesses and individuals faced economic struggles. The crisis created a massive demand for health-related products, which these companies capitalized on, increasing their wealth significantly. The wealth in crisis paradox reveals an uncomfortable truth. Economic crises do not affect everyone equally. While many people face financial ruin during such times, the wealthy are often in a position to take advantage of the situation. They have the resources to weather the storm, the influence to shape policies in their favor, and the opportunities to acquire valuable assets at discounted prices. Let's look at another example. During times of war or conflict, certain industries can thrive while the rest of the population suffers. For instance, defense contractors often see huge increases in demand for weapons, supplies, and technology during wartime. As nations struggle with economic turmoil and citizens experience hardship, these companies can make massive profits. The paradox is that, while wars lead to widespread suffering, some industries and individuals benefit greatly, further widening the gap between the rich and the poor. This paradox also plays out on a national level. Some countries can become wealthier during times of global economic crisis, particularly if they are able to exploit global instability. For example, during periods of global financial instability, countries with large natural resources, such as oil or precious metals, can profit from high demand and rising prices for these commodities. While other countries may struggle with inflation, unemployment, and economic contraction, resource-rich nations may see their wealth increase as they capitalize on global demand. However, the wealth in crisis paradox doesn't just point to the exploitation of resources, it also highlights the role of inequality in the system. The wealthiest individuals and corporations often have the power to influence economic policies, such as tax breaks, bailouts, or deregulation, which can allow them to benefit disproportionately during times of crisis. At the same time, the majority of people, especially the lower-income population, do not have the same influence or resources to protect themselves from the consequences of a crisis. This deepens inequality as the wealthy continue to grow their fortunes, while the poor face increasing challenges. This paradox also raises questions about the sustainability of such a system. If the wealthy continue to profit from crises, while the majority of people suffer, it creates an unstable and unsustainable economic environment. Inequality increases, social unrest grows, and the very system that allows some to profit from crises may eventually undermine itself. When people see that the system is rigged in favor of the rich, it can erode trust in institutions and create social tensions. One of the key reasons the wealth in crisis paradox exists is the ability of the wealthy to accumulate capital and resources during times of uncertainty. When the economy is in crisis, the most financially secure individuals or organizations are able to take risks that others cannot afford. They can buy stocks at low prices, purchase property in distressed markets, or make investments in companies that are struggling but still have value. This gives them a unique advantage over the general population, who are often struggling just to survive. Let's explore this in more detail with an example of real estate. During an economic crisis, housing prices often fall as people can no longer afford their homes or struggle to sell their properties. For those who already own significant wealth, this creates an opportunity to purchase properties at bargain prices. Real estate moguls and investment firms with deep pockets can buy up foreclosed properties, commercial real estate, or homes at a fraction of their value. They can then hold onto these properties until the market recovers, at which point they sell for a significant profit. Meanwhile, ordinary people are left in the lurch, losing their homes or struggling with rising rents. This paradox can be seen not just in financial crises but also in environmental disasters. After natural disasters such as floods, hurricanes, or wildfires, wealthy investors can swoop in and buy up damaged land or properties at a lower price. The crisis creates an opportunity for them to acquire valuable assets on the cheap, while others face displacement and destruction. Again, the system rewards the wealthy, exacerbating the inequality between those who can invest in crisis and those who simply tried to survive. The wealth in crisis paradox also brings into focus the role of government policies in shaping these outcomes. During a financial crisis, governments often step in with bailouts or stimulus packages to stabilize the economy. However, these policies can disproportionately benefit the wealthy. For example, during the 2008 financial crisis, Major banks received substantial government bailouts to avoid collapse, while ordinary people received little to no assistance. This kind of unequal response to a crisis reinforces the existing power dynamics, allowing the wealthy to recover and even thrive, while the broader population struggles to get by. So, how can we address the wealth in crisis paradox? One solution is to rethink the way we approach wealth distribution and economic policies. If we want to create a more equitable system, we need to ensure that during times of crisis, support goes to those who need it most. This might mean creating policies that focus on economic relief for the most vulnerable rather than prioritizing corporate bailouts. Additionally, implementing progressive taxation and regulations that limit the ability of the wealthy to exploit crises can help level the playing field. Ultimately, the wealth in crisis paradox reminds us that crises do not affect everyone equally. While many people face hardship, the wealthy often find ways to profit from the situation. This highlights deep issues of inequality and exploitation within our economic systems. To address this paradox, we need to challenge the structures that allow the wealthy to thrive at the expense of the majority and work toward creating a more fair and sustainable system that benefits everyone, not just the few. Imagine a robot that can perform complex mathematical calculations in the blink of an eye. It can solve problems faster and more accurately than any human could. But when you ask this same robot to walk across a room, it struggles to even take a single step without falling over. Or you tell it to recognize a person's face, and it can't tell the difference between a human and a cardboard cutout. This strange situation is the essence of Moravec's paradox, which highlights a surprising truth about artificial intelligence, AI tasks that are incredibly easy for humans, like moving, seeing, or understanding the world around us, are very difficult for machines. On the other hand, tasks that seem incredibly complex to humans, like solving equations or processing vast amounts of data, are actually much easier for AI. To understand this paradox, let's first look at what Moravec's paradox is and why it feels so counterintuitive. Human beings are naturally good at tasks that involve perception and movement. We can walk, run, pick things up, recognize faces, and understand the world around us with ease. In fact, we do these things without even thinking about them. But these very abilities that we take for granted are incredibly difficult for machines to replicate. For example, consider how simple it is for you to recognize a face in a crowd. You see someone you know, and without consciously thinking about it, your brain processes the image and identifies them. You've probably done this a million times in your life. But for a machine, this is a monumental challenge. A computer has to analyze a vast amount of data, shapes, colors, textures, angles, and lighting conditions, just to determine whether a face is human or not. This process takes a lot of computational power and still isn't as accurate as the human brain's ability to do it almost instantaneously. Similarly, think about walking. For humans, walking is second nature. We don't think about how our legs move, how our balance shifts, or how our body adjusts to the ground beneath us. We just walk. But for a robot, moving across a room involves a complex series of calculations and adjustments to avoid falling. The robot has to sense the ground, figure out where to place its feet, and maintain balance all at once. Even the most advanced robots today can struggle with basic movement, while humans do it effortlessly. On the flip side, machines excel at tasks that we humans find difficult or time-consuming. Complex calculations, processing massive amounts of data, or even playing strategic games like chess or Go are all things that AI can handle with ease. In fact, AI can solve mathematical equations, run simulations, and analyze data far faster and more accurately than any human ever could. What seems difficult to us, like understanding patterns in large data sets, comes naturally to machines. Let's take a real-world example of this paradox. In 1997, IBM's supercomputer Deep Blue famously defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov. Chess is a game that requires deep strategy, intuition, and foresight. It's a game that has fascinated humans for centuries, and it requires players to think many moves ahead. Kasparov was widely considered one of the best chess players in the world, and his victory over numerous other players was a testament to his skill. But Deep Blue, an AI, was able to beat him by running through billions of possible moves in a fraction of a second. The machine didn't understand chess the way Kasparov did. It didn't rely on intuition or deep thinking. Instead, it calculated every possible outcome and chose the optimal move. This is something that would be nearly impossible for a human to do, but for the machine, it was easy. In contrast, AI still struggles with basic tasks like understanding context or handling ambiguity. Take language, for instance. We humans can read between the lines, pick up on sarcasm, and understand subtle nuances in conversation. But machines? They can read the words, but understanding the deeper meaning of those words is still a huge challenge. For example, a machine might understand that "I can't stand this" means someone is upset, but it would struggle with the context of why they are upset or how serious the situation is. We can infer so much from tone, body language, and past experiences, things that are easy for us to understand but incredibly difficult for machines to process. Moravec's paradox shows how our brains and bodies are incredibly well adapted to the world around us. Over millions of years of evolution, humans have developed a natural ability to process sensory information and make quick decisions about what's happening in our environment. Walking, seeing, hearing, and interacting with the world are things we've mastered without even thinking. But these are the very abilities that machines struggle with. Why is this the case? Why are things that seem so easy for us so difficult for machines? The answer lies in the way we, as humans, evolved. Our brains are designed for the physical world. We've spent millions of years fine-tuning our ability to move, perceive, and interact with our environment in a way that makes sense for survival. Our brains are constantly processing information from our senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, and turning that information into actions and decisions that help us navigate the world. On the other hand, machines are designed to solve specific problems or perform specific tasks. They are optimized for handling large amounts of data, processing information quickly, and executing precise calculations. However, they lack the flexibility and adaptability that humans have when it comes to interacting with the real world. While humans evolved to be great at navigating uncertainty and complexity, machines are still learning how to deal with the unpredictability of the physical world. One important takeaway from Moravec's paradox is that the things that come most naturally to us, like walking, talking, and recognizing faces, are actually the result of incredibly complex processes that our brains have honed over millions of years. These are tasks that seem simple to us but involve highly sophisticated cognitive functions. Meanwhile, the tasks that seem difficult to us, like solving complex math problems, involve more straightforward, rule-based logic, which is exactly what machines are designed to excel at. So, how does this paradox affect the development of artificial intelligence? Well, as we continue to develop AI and robotics, we need to think carefully about what tasks we expect machines to perform. It's easy to assume that because machines can solve complex equations and process large amounts of data quickly, they can also handle everyday tasks like driving a car or recognizing faces. But as we've seen, these tasks are far more challenging than they first appear. AI developers are working hard to address these challenges by creating more advanced algorithms and training machines to recognize patterns in data. For example, self-driving cars are being designed to navigate roads by processing images and sensor data to recognize pedestrians, other vehicles, and traffic signs. But despite the progress, AI still struggles with situations that humans handle easily, like navigating through a crowded street or responding to sudden changes in the environment. The unpredictability of the real world is a major hurdle for machines, and it highlights the gap between what AI can do and what humans are naturally good at. Moravec's paradox also sheds light on the differences between human intelligence and machine intelligence. While humans excel at navigating the complexities of the physical world, machines excel at handling tasks that require vast amounts of data and high-speed calculations. In other words, we may be better at dealing with the real world, while machines are better suited to tasks that require raw computational power. But despite the challenges, the progress we've made in AI and robotics is remarkable. The more we understand Moravec's paradox, the more we can refine our approach to building machines that can interact with the world in human-like ways. By learning from how our brains work and incorporating that knowledge into AI development, we can create more sophisticated and adaptable machines that are better at handling the complexities of the world. Ultimately, Moravec's paradox reminds us that the things that seem simple to us are often the most complex and difficult for machines. While machines may excel at tasks that require logic and calculation, it's the tasks that come naturally to us, perception, movement, and social interaction, that present the biggest challenges. As AI continues to evolve, we'll likely see more breakthroughs in these areas, but it's a reminder that human intelligence is incredibly sophisticated and deeply connected to our ability to interact with the world around us. Imagine you're having a conversation with a colleague at work. You want to be polite, so you tell them, "I think your idea is great." But deep down, you know the idea might not be the best. You're being courteous, but by avoiding the truth, you're not being helpful. Over time, this type of politeness can lead to misunderstandings, inefficiency, or even resentment. This is the courtesy paradox, the idea that being overly polite, especially when honesty is needed, can backfire and lead to negative outcomes. While politeness is generally seen as a virtue, in some situations, it can create problems by preventing people from being clear or direct. At first glance, politeness seems like an obvious positive. It helps maintain good relationships, keeps things friendly, and avoids conflicts. We've all been taught that it's important to be kind and respectful to others. But the courtesy paradox highlights that excessive politeness can sometimes do more harm than good. When we prioritize politeness over honesty, it can result in confusion, frustration, or a lack of clarity. Let's start with an example. Imagine a meeting at work where a manager asks for feedback on a new project. Everyone at the table agrees that the project isn't going well and needs a lot of improvement, but no one speaks up. Because they're all being overly polite, trying to avoid hurting the manager's feelings. Instead of offering constructive criticism, everyone sits quietly, nodding and agreeing, even though they know the project has serious flaws. This is where the courtesy paradox comes into play. Politeness, in this case, prevents people from sharing the honest feedback that could improve the project. The result? The manager remains unaware of the issues, and the project fails to improve. In many cases, this paradox happens because people worry too much about being nice or keeping the peace. For example, think about a situation where you're at a social gathering and someone makes a comment that you strongly disagree with. Instead of expressing your opinion, you decide to remain polite, nodding along without saying anything. But by not addressing the comment, you allow misunderstandings to linger and your own feelings of frustration build up. Over time, this kind of politeness can cause resentment. You might feel that the other person isn't being honest, and they might feel like you're being disingenuous. Politeness, when used in moderation, can be a tool for building rapport and easing tensions. But when it goes too far, it can prevent us from communicating clearly. If we're always concerned about being nice or avoiding conflict, we might avoid saying things that need to be said. This can create inefficiencies in the workplace, miscommunication in relationships, and even lead to long-term frustrations that could have been avoided with a little honesty. One of the major issues with excessive politeness is that it can lead to ambiguity. When we're too polite, we don't always say exactly what we mean. Instead of expressing our true thoughts or feelings, we might sugarcoat things or be vague. For example, imagine you're a manager, and you ask one of your employees how they're feeling about a recent change in the workplace. If the employee doesn't feel comfortable being honest because they don't want to upset you, they might say, "Oh, it's fine, everything's great." But the reality is that the change is making them unhappy or stressed. In this case, the politeness creates confusion. The manager might think everything is fine, while the employee continues to feel frustrated and unheard. If the employee had been honest, the manager could have addressed the issue and made necessary adjustments. This is another aspect of the courtesy paradox. By being overly polite, we can create an environment where honest conversations are avoided. Over time, this can damage relationships and prevent problems from being solved. People may start to feel that they can't express their true thoughts, which leads to miscommunication and unresolved issues. The courtesy paradox is especially relevant in situations where directness is required for efficiency or problem solving. For example, Think about a time when you were trying to solve a problem with a friend or colleague. If you were too polite, you might have avoided giving them the tough love or direct feedback they needed to improve or fix the situation. Maybe you didn't want to hurt their feelings, so you said, "It's okay, it's not a big deal," when, in reality, the issue was important and needed attention. By not being direct, you missed an opportunity to resolve the issue quickly and efficiently. The courtesy paradox also appears in leadership. A leader's role is to guide and support their team, but if they prioritize being liked or avoiding conflict over being honest, it can lead to inefficiency and dissatisfaction. Leaders who are overly polite might avoid making tough decisions or giving constructive feedback, which can harm the team's progress. Employees may become confused about expectations, and problems may go unaddressed. A leader's primary job is to provide clear direction, and sometimes that means offering critical feedback, even if it's uncomfortable. In the long run, the leader's politeness might hurt the team more than help it. The paradox doesn't only apply to work environments, it also shows up in personal relationships. For example, imagine you're in a relationship where one person is overly polite and avoids confrontation at all costs. Maybe one person is constantly avoiding discussing important issues or feelings, afraid that it will lead to an argument. Over time, this politeness leads to misunderstandings, unmet needs, and resentment. Both people might feel that something is off, but they're too polite to address the problem directly. Instead of clearing the air, they sweep things under the rug, which only causes tension to build. So, what's the solution to the courtesy paradox? The key is balance. Politeness is important, and it's essential for maintaining positive relationships and creating a respectful environment. However, when honesty is needed, it's important to be able to speak openly and directly, even if it might feel uncomfortable. Instead of avoiding conflict, it's about addressing issues with respect and empathy. This way, politeness doesn't get in the way of effective communication, and people can feel heard and understood. One way to navigate this paradox is to embrace honest politeness, the idea that you can be both respectful and truthful. You don't have to be harsh or rude, but you can still communicate your true thoughts and feelings. For example, instead of saying, "I think your idea is great," when you don't agree, you could say, "I see where you're coming from, but I have some concerns about this approach. Maybe we could explore a different angle." This allows you to express your opinion while still being respectful and considerate. Another solution is to create an environment where honesty is encouraged and valued. In a workplace or personal relationship, if people feel safe expressing their thoughts and opinions without fear of judgment or retribution, they are more likely to be honest. In these situations, politeness doesn't have to come at the expense of truth. Instead, it becomes a tool for facilitating open, constructive conversations that lead to better outcomes for everyone involved. In conclusion, the courtesy paradox challenges us to rethink how we communicate. While politeness is an important social tool, when it's taken too far, it can lead to miscommunication, inefficiency, and even resentment. By balancing politeness with honesty and openness, we can navigate situations more effectively, ensuring that we address issues directly while still maintaining respect for others. The key is to recognize when it's time to be polite and when it's time to be honest, without sacrificing one for the other. Imagine two rival companies in the same industry, let's say two smartphone manufacturers, Company A and Company B. For years, they've competed fiercely, each trying to outperform the other by releasing the latest, most innovative products. But now, something unexpected happens. Instead of continuing to fight against each other, they decide to collaborate. Both companies realize that by pooling resources, sharing some technology, and even partnering on research and development, they could create a new, groundbreaking smartphone that could dominate the market. In the short term, this cooperation seems like a great idea. They both succeed by joining forces. However, here's the catch. In the long run, this cooperation could harm them both. Their success, built on collaboration, might set off a chain of events that ultimately weakens both companies. This is the competitive collaboration paradox, the idea that rivals can cooperate to succeed in a larger system, but their success may end up harming each other in the long run. At first glance, the paradox seems counterintuitive. Why would two competitors willingly cooperate, knowing that their success could eventually harm them both? The answer lies in the way competition and collaboration interact in complex systems. On the one hand, cooperation can lead to mutual benefits. But on the other hand, when two rivals collaborate, they may unintentionally create a situation where the success they gain through cooperation can disrupt the competitive balance, leading to negative consequences in the future. Let's break this down with a few examples. Think about the pharmaceutical industry. There are numerous pharmaceutical companies worldwide, and many of them compete fiercely for market share. But during global health crises, like the COVID-19 pandemic, some of these companies may collaborate. They share research, work together to distribute vaccines, or even combine efforts to address shortages in medical supplies. In the short term, this collaboration benefits everyone. More people get vaccinated, and medical resources are distributed more efficiently. However, in the long run, this collaboration could have negative effects. By working together, the companies may inadvertently reduce their competitive edge. For example, if they pool their research, it could limit their individual incentives to innovate or improve their products. Once the crisis is over, these companies may find that they've lost their edge in the marketplace, or that the collaboration has weakened their brand loyalty. Their rivals who didn't engage in such extensive cooperation may now have the advantage as they return to competing independently, and the companies that collaborated may have a harder time reclaiming their previous dominance. The competitive collaboration paradox can also be seen in environmental efforts. Imagine that two large companies in the energy sector, which traditionally rely on fossil fuels, agree to collaborate on creating greener, more sustainable energy solutions. The partnership might help accelerate the development of renewable energy technologies and reduce carbon emissions in the short term. However, this collaboration could also weaken both companies' efforts to transition fully to sustainable practices. They may become too dependent on each other, slowing down their individual innovation and reducing their drive to push for the radical changes needed in the industry. Their collaboration, which initially seemed beneficial, could hold them back in the long run. Another example of the competitive collaboration paradox occurs in the world of professional sports. Think about two top football teams that are fierce rivals in their league. They both compete for the same championship, but they realize that if they collaborate on training methods, share their best practices, and even discuss strategies, both teams could improve dramatically. By cooperating, they could both win more games, advance further in tournaments, and enjoy a higher level of success. However, in the long run, this collaboration could erode the excitement and drama of the competition. Fans might lose interest in the rivalry, knowing that the teams are no longer competing at the highest possible level. Moreover, if both teams benefit from shared strategies, the overall competitive balance in the league might shift, making the league less exciting and more predictable, which harms the teams in the long term by reducing their marketability and fan engagement. In business, the competitive collaboration paradox can also apply to industries where market share is a key factor. Companies that collaborate can often create new markets or make innovations that lead to widespread industry growth. For example, think about tech companies that work together to build a new platform or operating system. By collaborating, they can increase their collective customer base, boost sales, and benefit from mutual success. However, as the system grows, so does the number of competitors. Other companies might enter the market, offering similar products or services, and because the market has grown, competition becomes fiercer. In the end, the original competitors who were once cooperating could find themselves losing their dominance as the market expands and new players enter. What makes the competitive collaboration paradox particularly tricky is that, often, the cooperation between rivals seems like the right move at the time. Both companies or teams recognize that they can achieve more together than apart. They share resources, knowledge, and infrastructure, and in many cases, their combined efforts lead to immediate success. However, this success can be short-lived because once the cooperation takes hold, the individual players lose their competitive edge. As they grow stronger together, they weaken individually, making them more vulnerable to future challenges. In the long term, a system in which rivals cooperate too much can become stagnant. Competition is often what drives innovation. It encourages players to constantly improve, try new things, and push boundaries. But when cooperation replaces competition, there may be less incentive to keep innovating. The competitive collaboration paradox underscores the fact that a system built on cooperation can eventually reduce the very competition that makes it vibrant and dynamic. This paradox is particularly relevant in industries where the stakes are high and the pace of change is rapid. Take the tech industry, for example. Companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft are fierce competitors, but they also cooperate in some areas, such as industry standards and open-source technologies. While this collaboration can lead to faster development and broader industry advancements, it also raises the stakes of competition. If these companies cooperate too much, they might lose the edge that allows them to differentiate themselves. Too much collaboration can lead to a consolidation of power among the big players, leaving little room for smaller, more innovative companies to break through. In political systems, the competitive collaboration paradox can also emerge when rival political parties or nations work together on certain issues. For example, during times of international conflict or natural disaster, political rivals might come together to create solutions that benefit both parties. However, their cooperation might dilute their positions and weaken their ability to compete with each other in the future. The compromise required to work together can blur the lines between their political identities, making it harder for them to maintain their distinct political platforms. So, how can we navigate the competitive collaboration paradox? The key is finding balance. While cooperation between rivals can bring about short-term gains, it's crucial for each party to retain its ability to compete and innovate. This means that collaboration should be carefully managed to ensure that it doesn't stifle individual growth or competitive spirit. Rivals can collaborate in areas that benefit them without fully compromising their independence or competitive edge. By maintaining the right balance, both cooperation and competition can coexist in a way that drives long-term success. In conclusion, the competitive collaboration paradox teaches us that while cooperation between rivals can lead to short-term success, it can also create challenges in the long run. By working together, competitors can benefit from shared resources and collective growth, but they must be mindful not to lose their individuality or competitive edge. When rivals cooperate too much, they risk reducing the very competition that drives progress, leading to a more predictable, less dynamic system. The paradox shows us the complexity of balancing collaboration and competition in order to achieve lasting success. Imagine a seasoned doctor who has been practicing for decades. Over the years, they've seen hundreds of patients, diagnosed countless diseases, and developed a deep understanding of the human body. On the surface, they seem like an expert, someone whose experience should make them better at diagnosing and treating patients. However, as time goes on, something interesting happens. The doctor becomes less open to new methods, less flexible in their approach, and even resistant to new evidence. Despite their vast experience, the doctor begins to rely more on outdated practices or assumptions that may no longer be effective. This is the negative learning paradox. The idea that expertise, especially over time, can actually make someone less adaptable. More experience can entrench biases and hinder learning rather than enhancing it. At first, this paradox seems counterintuitive. After all, we're often told that with experience comes growth, learning, and improvement. The more experience someone has, the better they should become at their craft, right? Well, not always. In some fields, particularly those that require constant adaptation or new information, more experience can actually limit someone's ability to evolve. This is especially true when a person's experience becomes so ingrained that they stop questioning their assumptions or considering alternative approaches. Let's dive deeper into this idea with some examples. Take the example of a teacher. A teacher who has been in the classroom for 20 years might have developed a teaching style that works for them. They've figured out what methods, materials, and approaches seem to work best with their students. But as time goes on, the classroom environment changes. The students' needs evolve, technology advances, and new educational research emerges that suggests more effective teaching strategies. However, the teacher, relying on years of experience, may be resistant to change. They might dismiss new teaching methods as fad or unnecessary, preferring to stick with what has worked for them in the past. In this case, their extensive experience has made them less adaptable and more entrenched in their way of doing things, limiting their ability to learn and grow. This is an example of the negative learning paradox. The more experience someone has, the harder it becomes to embrace new ideas, even if those ideas might be more effective. This is because experience can create mental shortcuts, patterns of thinking that become automatic and ingrained over time. These shortcuts can help us make quick decisions, but they can also lead to biases and resistance to new information. In fact, the more we learn and experience, the more we become attached to our knowledge and past successes. We start to believe that because something worked in the past, it will always work. This can cause us to stop questioning our methods, which can be detrimental when circumstances change or new information arises. In other words, experience can create a false sense of certainty, making us less open to learning from others or adapting to new situations. The negative learning paradox can also be observed in the business world. Imagine a company that has been successful for many years using a specific business model. The company has always focused on traditional marketing methods, and these methods have yielded positive results for decades. But then the market begins to shift. Consumer behaviors change, digital marketing becomes more prevalent, and the business environment becomes increasingly competitive. Despite all these changes, the company's leadership, composed of long-time industry experts, continues to rely on the old ways of doing business. They may be so set in their ways that they fail to see the need for a digital transformation. The company's experience and past success might be hindering its ability to adapt to the new market. By sticking with what has worked in the past, they risk falling behind their competitors who are more willing to learn and change. This paradox doesn't just apply to businesses or teachers, it can also be seen in our personal lives. Think about someone who has been practicing a skill for years, such as playing an instrument, painting, or even sports. Over time, they develop a particular technique or style that they become comfortable with. But as they become more experienced, they might stop experimenting with new techniques or approaches. Instead, they rely on the same methods that worked for them in the past, even if those methods are no longer the most effective. This reliance on old habits can prevent them from improving or evolving their skills. In this case, their experience has actually become a barrier to further learning. The negative learning paradox can also apply to our social lives. People who have been in the same social circles for a long time may become less open to meeting new people or considering different perspectives. They might stick with the same group of friends, the same conversations, and the same social activities, even when those relationships or interactions become stale. Their past experiences in these relationships make them comfortable, but they also limit their ability to grow and connect with others in new ways. This paradox is especially noticeable in fields that require innovation and constant adaptation. For example, in technology, things change rapidly. New programming languages, tools, and technologies emerge all the time. While younger professionals in the field may be more open to learning these new technologies, older experts, who have spent years mastering one particular system, may be reluctant to embrace new developments. The more experience they have, the more set in their ways they become, and this can make it harder for them to keep up with the latest trends. This is not because they lack intelligence or capability, it's because their expertise in a specific area has made them resistant to learning new things. Interestingly, the negative learning paradox is a reminder that expertise doesn't guarantee continuous growth. In fact, being highly skilled in one area can make it harder to stay open-minded and flexible. The more we learn, the more we become attached to what we know, and the less willing we are to challenge our own assumptions. The paradox suggests that experience can sometimes narrow our focus and prevent us from seeing new opportunities for improvement. However, this doesn't mean that experience is inherently bad. In fact, experience can be extremely valuable. It's the foundation of expertise, and it provides a deep well of knowledge to draw from. The key is to balance that experience with a willingness to remain open to new ideas, feedback, and changes in the environment. Experts need to be aware of the potential drawbacks of their experience and consciously work to avoid becoming rigid in their thinking. Continuous learning should be encouraged, even for those who have spent decades honing their skills. One way to overcome the negative learning paradox is to foster a mindset of lifelong learning. This means being open to new ideas, seeking out challenges that push you out of your comfort zone, and being willing to learn from others, regardless of their experience level. For example, a seasoned professional in any field could benefit from collaborating with younger colleagues who may bring fresh perspectives or new approaches to the table. By working together, the experienced professional can continue to grow while also sharing their knowledge with others. Another strategy is to actively seek feedback. Experts often become so comfortable in their own knowledge that they stop asking for input from others. But feedback, whether from peers, mentors, or even critics, can help identify blind spots and areas where growth is still possible. Acknowledging that we don't know everything, no matter how much experience we have, is a crucial part of continued learning. In conclusion, the negative learning paradox teaches us that more experience doesn't always lead to better learning. In fact, it can sometimes entrench biases, narrow our focus, and make us less adaptable. While expertise is valuable, it's important to remain flexible, open to new ideas, and committed to continuous learning. The more experienced we become, the more we need to actively challenge ourselves to grow. Only by doing so can we avoid the trap of becoming stuck in outdated ways and continue to evolve, both personally and professionally. Imagine you've spent years studying a particular profession, let's say firefighting. You've studied all the theories about fire behavior, safety protocols, and the best tools for the job. You've attended countless hours of classroom training, reading textbooks, watching instructional videos, and even participating in controlled drills. Everything you've learned has been in a safe, controlled environment where the risks are minimal and the stakes are low. Then one day you are called into a real emergency, a massive, fast-moving fire that's raging through a building. Suddenly, the situation is no longer theoretical. The heat is unbearable, smoke fills your lungs, and every decision you make could be the difference between life and death. The carefully practiced techniques that worked in training don't seem to be enough to handle the chaos around you. In the heat of the moment, you find that your instincts, developed through real-world experience, not just theoretical learning, are the most important tools at your disposal. This is the essence of the crisis apprentice paradox, the idea that learning in times of peace, in a calm and controlled environment, can't fully prepare you for the unpredictable and chaotic real-world situations where instincts often matter more than theory. The paradox highlights the limits of theoretical learning and the importance of experience and quick thinking in high-stress situations. On the surface, it seems like studying and preparing for a crisis should make you better equipped to handle it. After all, the more you learn, the more knowledge you have, and that should help you make better decisions, right? Well, not necessarily. In reality, learning in a calm environment can only go so far. When you're faced with a crisis, something unpredictable and high pressure, theoretical knowledge alone isn't enough. You need to rely on your instincts, quick reflexes, and the ability to adapt in real time. Let's take another example, the military. Soldiers undergo extensive training, learning everything from combat strategies to survival techniques. They spend months, even years, in simulated environments, practicing their tactics and techniques. They learn how to use weapons, how to navigate dangerous terrain, and how to work as a team. But no amount of training can fully replicate the chaos of a battlefield. In real combat, the noise, the confusion, the uncertainty, and the adrenaline make it nearly impossible to think through every decision. In those moments, it's the soldier's instincts, honed by experience and repetition, that guide them through the chaos. The crisis apprentice paradox is evident in many fields, especially those that deal with high-stakes, high-pressure situations. For instance, emergency room doctors receive years of education, followed by internships and residencies in controlled environments where they practice their craft. But when a patient comes in with a rare, life-threatening condition, all the theory in the world can't prepare the doctor for the uncertainty and speed at which they need to act. In that moment, the doctor's ability to make snap decisions based on limited information and their years of experience becomes more important than any textbook knowledge. This paradox extends beyond the realm of physical professions and can be seen in areas like business and politics. Take, for example, A CEO who has spent years studying management theories and best practices. They might understand all the concepts of leadership, corporate strategy, and financial forecasting. However, when a global crisis strikes, like a recession, a market crash, or a company scandal, no amount of theory can prepare them for the emotional and psychological toll of leading a company through chaos. They must rely on their instincts, adaptability, and experience navigating through unpredictable challenges, which can often lead to better outcomes than relying purely on academic knowledge. In everyday life, the crisis apprentice paradox can also be seen in how we prepare for personal challenges. Let's say you've spent years reading self-help books, learning about how to manage stress, and understanding how to deal with difficult emotions. You might feel well prepared for handling life's challenges. But when a crisis hits, a sudden illness, the loss of a loved one, or a personal financial disaster, you might find that your theoretical knowledge is not enough to keep you grounded. In those moments, it's your ability to quickly adapt, trust your gut, and take action based on what feels right that helps you survive the storm. The crisis apprentice paradox highlights a crucial distinction between theoretical learning and real-world experience. In controlled environments, we can analyze situations, think through every step, and make decisions based on what we've learned. But when faced with a crisis, everything changes. The stakes are higher, the consequences are immediate, and the environment is unpredictable. It's in those moments that our instincts take over, helping us make decisions faster and more effectively than any textbook could. Why does this paradox exist? One reason is that the human brain is wired to learn from experience. While theory provides a foundation, it's the actual experience of navigating difficult situations that shapes our decision-making abilities. Over time, as we face more real-world challenges, we build a mental database of patterns, reactions, and strategies that we can call upon in the future. These instincts aren't always perfect, but they are shaped by years of lived experience, and they help us navigate situations that can't be predicted in advance. Another reason the crisis apprentice paradox exists is because of the nature of crises themselves. Crises are unpredictable by definition. Even if you've studied every possible scenario, there will always be variables you can't account for: emotions, the behavior of others, the timing of events. In these moments, the ability to adapt quickly, make snap decisions, and learn on the fly is more important than trying to recall a specific piece of theoretical knowledge. So, how can we apply the lessons of the crisis apprentice paradox to our own lives? First, it's important to recognize that both theory and experience have value. While learning the basics, whether it's in school, through training, or self-study, is essential, it's equally important to gain real-world experience and learn to trust your instincts. In many professions, there's a significant gap between what is taught in theory and what happens in practice. The more we immerse ourselves in real-world challenges, the better equipped we become to handle crises. One way to bridge the gap between theory and experience is to actively seek out opportunities for hands-on learning. In many fields, internships, apprenticeships, and simulations allow us to gain real-world experience while still having a safety net. These experiences help us build the instincts and adaptability needed when the stakes are high. It's about finding a balance between theoretical knowledge and practical experience, where both can complement each other. The crisis apprentice paradox also teaches us the importance of staying adaptable. Even as we accumulate more experience, we must remain open to learning new things. Theories and techniques evolve, and the ability to adapt our instincts to new situations is crucial. Just because something worked in the past doesn't mean it will work in the future. By continually questioning our assumptions and refining our instincts, we can ensure that we are ready for whatever crisis might come our way. In conclusion, the crisis apprentice paradox reveals a fundamental truth. While theoretical learning is important, it's real-world experience and instinct that truly prepare us for crisis situations. No amount of study can fully prepare us for the chaos and unpredictability of the real world. Instead, we need to combine our knowledge with the ability to adapt quickly and trust our instincts. Whether in a profession or in personal life, the ability to thrive in a crisis comes not just from what we know, but from how we respond when the unexpected happens. Through this balance of theory and experience, we can better navigate the challenges that life throws our way. As knowledge expands and more people specialize in different fields, it might seem like we're progressing towards a more informed and enlightened society. With advancements in technology, science, and various areas of expertise, we're constantly learning new things and pushing the boundaries of human understanding. However, there's an interesting paradox at play. As knowledge increases and becomes more specialized, it actually becomes harder for any one person to understand the whole picture, leading to fragmentation and, in some cases, ignorance. This is the knowledge fragmentation paradox. The idea that the more knowledge we accumulate, the harder it becomes for anyone to grasp the entirety of it, which can lead to gaps in understanding and a lack of connection between different areas of expertise. At first, this might sound counterintuitive. How can more knowledge lead to less understanding? After all, isn't the goal of acquiring knowledge to make us smarter and more informed? The problem arises because as knowledge grows, it becomes increasingly specialized. Experts in one area might be highly knowledgeable, but they may know very little about other areas outside their field. This results in a fragmented view of the world, where people have deep knowledge in specific domains but lack a broader understanding of how those domains connect to one another. Let's start with an example to illustrate this paradox. Imagine you're a scientist specializing in neuroscience. You know everything there is to know about how the brain works, from the structure of neurons to the way they communicate with each other. But if someone asks you about the intricacies of climate change or the latest developments in artificial intelligence, your understanding might be quite limited. While you're a world expert in neuroscience, your knowledge outside of that field is fragmented. You can't fully grasp the complexity of other fields, and you might even miss out on the connections between your own expertise and other areas of science. This is a problem that's becoming more common as fields of study grow increasingly specialized. In the past, many scholars and thinkers tried to understand the world as a whole, combining knowledge from multiple disciplines to form a broad understanding of reality. But today, many fields of study are so vast and specialized that no single person can keep up with everything. Even within a single discipline, knowledge is becoming more fragmented. For example, in medicine, you might have specialists in cardiology, neurology, dermatology, and so on. While each of these experts is incredibly knowledgeable in their specific area, very few of them have the expertise to understand all aspects of human health. This specialization has created an environment where experts in one field may not fully appreciate the latest research or breakthroughs in another. The knowledge fragmentation paradox doesn't just apply to science. It can be seen in nearly every area of human activity. In business, for example, you might have experts in marketing, finance, human resources, and operations, each with their own specialized knowledge. But a CEO, who needs to understand how all these areas work together, might find it difficult to keep up with every development in each field. As a result, the CEO might make decisions based on incomplete or outdated knowledge, even if they have the best intentions. The more specialized knowledge becomes, the harder it is to see the bigger picture, and that can lead to inefficiency and missed opportunities. This paradox also shows up in the way we consume information in today's world. With the rise of the internet and the explosion of content available online, it's easier than ever to access specialized knowledge. But with this access comes the challenge of understanding how everything fits together. Take the example of someone trying to understand global politics. They can read articles, watch videos, and listen to podcasts on various issues, economics, foreign policy, human rights, etc. But without a comprehensive understanding of how these areas interconnect, it can be difficult to see the full picture. Someone who is well informed about one aspect of politics might be completely ignorant about others, creating a fragmented worldview. Another example of the knowledge fragmentation paradox can be found in technology. Today, software development is so complex that even a skilled programmer might only understand a small portion of a project. You might have one person working on the back-end infrastructure, another person handling the user interface design, and yet another person developing security protocols. While all of these experts are crucial to the success of the project, it's nearly impossible for any one person to understand the entire system in detail. As a result, the final product may work well, but the overall understanding of how it functions can be fragmented. If a problem arises, it might take a team of specialists to fix it, but the root cause could be difficult to pinpoint because the knowledge is so dispersed. One of the challenges created by the knowledge fragmentation paradox is that it can lead to a lack of communication between different areas of expertise. If you have experts in different fields who don't share their knowledge or insights with one another, it can create silos of information. This can lead to inefficiencies and missed opportunities for innovation. For example, in the field of medicine, a cardiologist might focus solely on heart health, while a nutritionist focuses on diet and a fitness expert focuses on exercise. However, all three of these factors are interconnected, and by working in isolation, these experts might miss out on holistic approaches to health that could be more effective in treating patients. In some ways, the knowledge fragmentation paradox also highlights the limitations of the education system. Students are often trained to specialize in one field, and while that expertise is valuable, it can make it difficult for them to branch out into other areas. A student who focuses on engineering may excel in their field but might not have much exposure to the social sciences, humanities, or arts. This specialization can create a narrow worldview, where students become experts in their own areas but lack the broader understanding needed to navigate complex, interconnected global issues. The more a student specializes, the less likely they are to have a well-rounded understanding of the world. The paradox also plays a role in how we approach problem solving. As problems become more complex, they often require solutions that draw on knowledge from multiple fields. Climate change, for instance, is a problem that touches on science, economics, politics, and sociology. To address it effectively, experts from different fields need to collaborate and share their knowledge. But the fragmentation of knowledge can make this collaboration difficult. Experts in one field may not be able to communicate effectively with experts in another field, even if they are working toward the same goal. This creates a barrier to finding comprehensive solutions to global problems. So, what can we do to overcome the knowledge fragmentation paradox? One possible solution is to encourage interdisciplinary collaboration. By bringing together experts from different fields, we can create a more holistic understanding of complex problems. For example, scientists, policymakers, and business leaders could work together to address issues like climate change, drawing on their diverse knowledge to create more effective solutions. Encouraging communication between different areas of expertise can help break down the silos of knowledge and create a more integrated understanding of the world. Another solution is to promote lifelong learning. While specialization is important, it's also crucial to continue learning about other fields, even outside of your area of expertise. By broadening our knowledge and encouraging curiosity about different disciplines, we can develop a more well-rounded understanding of the world. This could mean taking courses in subjects outside of your primary field, reading widely, or simply staying open to new ideas and perspectives. Lifelong learning can help bridge the gaps between specialized knowledge and create a more interconnected worldview. Finally, the knowledge fragmentation paradox reminds us that, while specialization is necessary in many areas, it's also important to recognize the limits of that specialization. No single person or field can understand everything, and it's essential to acknowledge that we all have blind spots. Being aware of the fragmentation of knowledge can help us approach problems with humility, recognizing that we may need to collaborate with others to gain a fuller understanding and find better solutions. In conclusion, the knowledge fragmentation paradox teaches us that as knowledge grows and becomes more specialized, it can become harder to see the bigger picture. While specialization is essential for advancing expertise, it can also lead to fragmentation and a lack of understanding between different fields. To address this paradox, we need to encourage interdisciplinary collaboration, promote lifelong learning, and remain aware of the limitations of specialized knowledge. By doing so, we can create a more integrated and comprehensive understanding of the world and tackle the complex problems that lie ahead. In today's fast-paced world, standardization has become a crucial part of how industries, businesses, and even cultures operate. Think about it. Everything from the way we communicate, the products we buy, the technology we use, and even the way we work is built on a set of standards. Whether it's a universal phone charger, standardized measurements for products, or global business practices, standardization makes things simpler, more efficient, and easier to use. The faster we establish standards and norms, the more streamlined and accessible our world becomes. However, there's a paradox at play here. The faster we standardize processes, the more we risk stagnating innovation and creating a world where cultures and ideas begin to blend into one homogeneous whole. This is the accelerated standardization paradox. The idea that the push for standardization, while making things more efficient and predictable, can also limit creativity, reduce diversity, and stifle progress in the long run. The more we focus on making everything the same, the less room we leave for new ideas, alternative approaches, and cultural uniqueness. At first, this paradox may seem counterintuitive. After all, standardization is often seen as the key to progress. It allows us to work efficiently, reduces confusion, and ensures compatibility across systems. But as standardization accelerates, it can gradually suppress the very creativity and diversity that drives innovation and cultural richness. The push to make everything standardized often results in a world that feels increasingly uniform, where the space for individuality and new, creative thinking is minimized. Let's take a closer look at how the accelerated standardization paradox plays out in different areas of life. First, let's consider the world of business. Companies often pursue standardization to increase efficiency, reduce costs, and simplify operations. Take, for example, fast food chains like McDonald's. One of the reasons McDonald's is so successful globally is because it has standardized its menu, supply chains, and operations. Whether you're in New York, Tokyo, or Paris, the Big Mac tastes the same, and the service is expected to be equally efficient. This level of standardization makes McDonald's highly successful because it can easily replicate the same experience in different locations. However, there's a cost to this approach. As McDonald's and other large corporations standardize their processes, they lose some of the uniqueness and innovation that smaller, local restaurants might bring to the table. The focus on efficiency and consistency means that there's less room for new ideas, and it becomes harder for small businesses to stand out with unique offerings. The more businesses standardize their practices, the more similar their products and services become. In the long run, this can lead to a lack of diversity in the market, as the very drive for efficiency ends up crowding out innovation. The accelerated standardization paradox is also present in the tech world. Think about the proliferation of smartphones over the last decade. Today, the vast majority of smartphones have a similar design, feature set, and functionality. The operating systems, whether it's iOS or Android, are standardized to make sure apps work the same across different devices. This standardization has made it easier for consumers to choose smartphones, as they know what to expect in terms of performance and usability. But this also means that innovation in smartphones has slowed down. Many smartphones now look and function almost identically. Most brands follow the same design trends, such as larger screens, minimal buttons, and similar camera configurations. There's little room for experimentation with radical new designs or functionalities because the industry is so focused on adhering to standards. What was once an arena for creativity and breakthrough technologies is now an increasingly predictable space, driven by standardization that limits new ideas. In the world of fashion, the accelerated standardization paradox can be seen in the rise of global brands and the standardization of style. Major clothing brands like Zara, H&M, and Uniqlo are known for their ability to quickly produce trendy clothes that appeal to a wide audience. These brands create standardized collections that are sold globally, with similar designs available in every store, regardless of location. While this makes shopping more convenient and accessible, it also means that fashion is becoming more homogeneous. There's less room for local designers to experiment with unique styles, and the diversity of cultural fashion expression starts to fade as global brands dominate the market. In contrast, small, independent designers who embrace a more diverse and unique approach may struggle to compete in this standardized environment. The world of fashion, like many other industries, risks losing the diversity of styles and ideas that make it interesting and vibrant as it becomes increasingly standardized. The accelerated standardization paradox is not just about businesses and industries, though It also has cultural implications. Globalization has led to the spread of standardized cultural practices. The influence of Western media, entertainment, and products has created a world where cultures are blending and traditional cultural differences are becoming less distinct. While cultural exchange can be a positive thing, it can also lead to cultural homogenization, where diverse ways of life and thinking are replaced by a more uniform, global culture. For example, the global popularity of Hollywood movies, Western fashion trends, and fast food has led to the adoption of similar cultural practices around the world. In many cities, you'll find the same brands, the same food chains, and the same entertainment options, regardless of the local culture. While this may make the world feel more connected, it can also lead to the loss of unique cultural traditions and practices. As countries and cultures become more interconnected, there's a danger that we could lose the richness and diversity that come from embracing local traditions and ideas. This paradox is also visible in education. As the global education system becomes more standardized, the focus shifts toward a common curriculum and testing system. While standardization helps ensure that all students are receiving a certain level of education, it can also limit the scope for creative and critical thinking. When every student is taught the same way, with the same tests and the same content, it becomes harder for teachers to tailor their approach to the unique needs and interests of their students. As a result, students may be less likely to develop original ideas or explore new ways of thinking. The push for standardized education, while creating a level of equality, can inadvertently stifle innovation and intellectual curiosity. Another example is in the world of software development. In the past, open-source software was an area where developers from around the world could collaborate and experiment with new ideas. Many groundbreaking technologies were created in open, unregulated environments where innovation was the focus. But as more companies and developers focus on creating standardized solutions, the space for new, experimental software shrinks. Developers are encouraged to work within existing frameworks and norms, which can stifle creativity and prevent the emergence of new ideas. In the arts, this paradox is often discussed in the context of mainstream entertainment. As the entertainment industry grows and the demand for content increases, more and more platforms are producing shows and movies that follow familiar formulas. Streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Hulu have found success by offering content that appeals to a broad audience. However, as they churn out more content, there's often less room for experimental or niche work that doesn't fit the established mold. This is the paradox. By trying to cater to the masses and standardize content, the industry risks losing the diversity and innovation that make the arts exciting. At the same time, standardized processes in entertainment can lead to the overproduction of similar types of content. Reality TV shows, action blockbusters, and superhero films dominate the entertainment landscape, while unique or experimental works struggle to find an audience. This creates a world where content is designed to fit into pre-existing formulas, limiting the opportunities for fresh and original ideas. In summary, the accelerated standardization paradox illustrates the tension between efficiency and innovation. On the one hand, standardization makes processes smoother, products more accessible, and systems more predictable. But on the other hand, it limits creativity, reduces diversity, and stifles innovation. As we push for faster and broader standardization, we risk creating a world where everything looks and feels the same, where new ideas are harder to come by, and where cultural uniqueness fades. The challenge, then, is finding a balance between the benefits of standardization and the need for creative expression, diversity, and original thinking. By fostering environments where innovation can thrive within a framework of standardization, we can ensure that we don't lose the richness and variety that make the world an exciting and dynamic place to live.